Mr. Chairman. My name is Heather Jacobson, and I'm an attorney in Douglas, Wyoming. Are you having problems hearing me still? Okay. And I represent probably well over half of the surface and mineral owners in Converse County and southern Campbell County. And so my experience with federal units is much different than what was presented earlier. And so I think it might be helpful to start with how I understand federal units, because not being an oil industry professional, I have a much simpler explanation for federal units. So let me start there. So a lot of the federal units that I have experience with, let me make clear, are more than 25,000 acres. So a number of the ones that I deal with are 30,000 acres. And we throw out those numbers without really having a good frame of reference for exactly how big that is. And that is right about 50 square miles, just so that everybody's knows. And so if you think that a normal drilling and spacing unit created through the state of Wyoming is only 2 sections, then when you think about that, that's 25 of a normal drilling and spacing units put together. And we'd like to start with this, that this is a federal issue. It's not created by the state, it's nothing like that. So please, when I talk about these federal units, do understand that this is a federal issue. But we can try helping as much as we can on this. And so, as was presented earlier in these federal units, the rules say that they can put all of these acres together and hold them, and that the rule says they're supposed to drill a well within 6 months. What was not presented is in my experience, I have only seen once where a well was drilled within 6 months. There is a provision to that allows for a continuance, and a continuance, and a continuance over and over again. I dealt with one federal unit that at year 6, where it was holding 30,000 acres with nobody getting paid anything, and there had never been a well drilled on it. Finally, I wrote an objection to the BLM and CC'd our federal congressional delegation, our governor, and everybody else. And it's still, nothing happened still. Finally, I think between year 9, 10, 11, somewhere around that, finally, that was when the BLM finally got rid of that unit. But for that time frame, every mineral owner in that unit had their lease held, regardless of what the terms of your lease states. Because, you know, these leases said it'll be 3 years, and then if there's no production, if you don't get any royalty off of it, then it expires, or they have to pay you bonus money again to hold it. And so that's what these people signed these leases thinking. And yet then as soon as they signed them, and it's not the mineral owner that commits to the unit, it's the mineral lessee that commits to the unit. So then these people that own the minerals had no say in it. And so when they say voluntarily committed, it's not by the mineral owner, it's voluntarily committed by the lessee. And so people have become more educated about federal units. But when a certain company showed up in Converse County and was the main user of these federal units, nobody knew about them. And they weren't referenced in any of the leases or anything else. And so there were an awful lot of mineral owners out there that did not get the bargain that they thought that they bargained for. And so then when we studied up on the federal units, we read the same rules. We said, okay, these aren't going to be that bad because every 6 months they have to drill a new well. And then we saw, in my experience, when they did drill a well, then they said it was supposed to be another 6 months. Oftentimes it was 4 or 5 years before they drilled another well. And unlike a state drilling and spacing unit, just because they've drilled one well in that federal unit does not mean every royalty owner in that federal unit gets royalties. As they stated earlier, only those people within 750 feet of the drill bore generally get any royalties on this. And so if you're not within that 750 feet, your minerals may be 7, 8 miles away, and they're still being held for free by this federal unit. And so Generally, mineral owners find it to be a horrible thing to have your minerals included in a federal unit. And there's, without knowing, I would guess there's well over 150,000 acres in Converse County alone that's held by these federal units. And there has been a greater adherence to the rules in the last year. We have been seeing the BLM actually saying occasionally, okay, if you're not going to drill after so many years, we're going to make you contract the terms of this unit, the boundaries of this unit, and we'll make you release some of these leases. But that's still not the norm. And it's still not what the rules and regulations state. And it's still not as what's contained in the unit agreement that they send out that, like they stated, is well over an inch thick, and people don't know what's in there. And so even when they get it, they don't know what's in there, and it says it can be amended at will by the operator. So even if they did read it and thought they fully understood the terms, it can still be changed without them knowing. So this is my background as an attorney representing mineral owners in federal units. And so it hasn't been good. The other problem with federal units is shockingly, the BLM is a little slow on handling paperwork. And so when a company drills a well, the 750 feet establishment of a participating area is not actually codified or in the rules or regulations anywhere. So the BLM takes a look at it every single time. Well, that BLM look might last 2 or 3 years. So you may have a drilled and producing well right in the middle of your minerals, and you're not getting any royalties on it for 2 or 3 years because the company's waiting for the BLM to approve their proposed producing area before they pay out any royalties. And this is not the operator's fault. Everybody's waiting on the BLM. And so these are things that make it, that there's a lot of hard parts for what the state can do about this. I mean, this needs to be changed on the federal level to make your guys' jobs easier. The other part is I represent surface owners in Converse County. The huge problem with federal units from a surface owner standpoint is, first off, as a surface owner, you get no notification that the minerals underneath you may be proposed to be committed to a federal unit. So you don't even know if they are or not. And then if they are, you may still not know if you have a good operator that you're negotiating a surface use agreement with. If you have an operator that wants to fight, then that operator is going to threaten and say, under federal law or federal rules and regulations, I can go get a surface damage bond through the BLM, and that will enable me to have access on your private land anywhere inside the scope of this unit and do whatever I want for free, as long as I put that bond up. And so all of a sudden and Wyoming law does have a similar provision for a split estate bond, but the difference is that only allows them access in the drilling and spacing unit. So 1,280 acres. We're now looking at 30,000 acres that they can do whatever they want, wherever they want on it for this bond. And it is very unusual for an operator to actually seek that bond, but that threat is always out there when you're dealing with certain operators. And so it affects both the mineral owners and the surface owners. And I'm explaining this from a mineral and surface owner perspective, not just because that's who I represent, but also you, as the state of Wyoming, are both mineral owners and surface owners in federal units. So it's not just private landowners and private minerals owners that are disadvantaged by federal units, it's also the state of Wyoming, because a company can hold all these acres without ever having to hardly produce off of them for a very long time, and that does affect state minerals as well as private minerals. And so the question is what as a state we can do to try to help this situation? And I think that there are a number of different options out there. Mr. Obermiller mentioned that he didn't like the idea of trying to limit the acreage in federal units, but I think that would be a huge deal. if the state of Wyoming did that. I think additionally, it would be a huge deal for the state of Wyoming to make certain that they provide the same protections in any kind of APDs issued, state APDs issued in federal units that they would for, that they disregard the fact that it is a federal unit and that they provide any additional protections that we can to protect both, well, with the Oil and Gas Commission, it would be mainly the mineral owners in these kind of deals. And so, and I mean, I hope that there's other people out there a lot smarter than me that can figure out other innovative ways to be able to limit the kind of damages that federal units do, not only to private surface owners and private mineral owners, but also additionally to the state of Wyoming itself on these issues. And so I thought that maybe it would be good to have the opposite perspective on federal units and maybe be able to explain them more from a non-oil and gas professional standpoint, and encourage other people to come up with a few better ideas than I've been able to come up with so far that the state can help out on this issue. So if you guys have any additional questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Yep. Mr. Co-Chair?
Mr. Chairman, if I didn't know better, I would say that this might be a way for the federal government to delay our getting to those resources. But I'm sure that's not their intention.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, the funny part is that when federal units really took off, they probably were intended to help companies produce more. But now I think that they are intended to make certain that they can limit it as much as possible. And that is only my personal opinion on that. But
When, so the appeal or the request for a continuance or an extension on the 6-month obligation to find a producing area, is that goes to just a regional office in Casper, or is that
Yes.
by the operator?
no, the operator just sends it to the regional office in Casper. There are some operators that will notify other members of the units or people that own the minerals or the lessees, but oftentimes they don't even have notice of it. They don't even know that they've applied for it to be extended.
So then, representing a mineral owner or a landowner, where do you seek due process to protect private rights? Is that through that office, or is it a matter of whether you go through the solicitor's office in Denver? Where do you go?
That's the question I've asked myself a lot, because at this point we haven't been afforded any due process or any ability to comment on those decisions at any point in time.
Okay, seems to. Okay, committee, any further questions? Okay, we appreciate the additional comments. Thank you very much. Anybody else wishes to speak on this issue? So, Mr. Overmuller, did you see? Is Mr. Detail, he's not in the audience, right? So I can't give him for rushing to the microphone to get a bucket of wings, right?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Pete Obermuller, Petroleum Association of Wyoming. A couple of things. One on topic, one a little off topic, going back to a question that a member asked previously that I wanted to provide an answer for, that I don't think he got the answer or got an answer for on why we don't have as many rigs as we would all like. I'd like to answer that too, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman. But first of all, on the federal exploratory units, again, we have to go back to just the name Federal Exploratory Unit. It's exploratory. There is no production there at all. And it is entirely 100% voluntary to join it. And that voluntary election happens at the lease. So the landowner, mineral owner leases, and the lease may say, we may join a federal exploratory unit. It may not say that, it may come later. but every single mineral owner has the right 100% to decide to join a federal explorer unit or not. They're not forced into it unless they accept that provision. So that's important to know. The exploratory part is important to understand because it is there to help an area that is exploratory. We don't have production there, to remove some of the barriers in terms of, Mr. Degenfeller sort of glossed over it a little bit, but the spacing and the setbacks and all those sorts of things that can, you form it into one lease, and it helps operators to be able to explore for and develop in areas they may not otherwise do it. So sure, we could get rid of federal exploratory units, and because Ms. Jacobson and I completely agree that the BLM is a struggle, we're in the same camp on that one, and we could do away with federal exploratory units, but does that mean that a well will be drilled on Ms. Jacobson's client's property and minerals? Maybe, maybe not. You get rid of it, and the baggage that you take for that is no better than the baggage that you have with the federal exploratory unit. I would argue that the FEU allows for better possibilities for the mineral owner to recover than not. Now, does that mean it's perfect? No. You can be on the edges of a federal exploratory unit, and you have some of the timing and all of that, and the delays from the BLM until you don't get revenue as quickly as you hoped you would get it. And stipulate that. It's certainly not perfect. Certainly doesn't work as quickly and as well as we all might want. But I would argue, is there an alternative that fixes it? I'm hard pressed on that one. So, Mr. Chairman, unless there's questions on that, I'll just digress for 1 second and on the other question.
I just, wrestling this around, I see the policy on both sides of this. And so a little bit of the unwary gets caught with leases, standard leases at where the mineral owner allowed the leasing entity is not always necessary, necessary to the operator, be a speculator or a company putting together a set of leases to then join one of these units. And so if you're in an area without a great deal of production, which has happened through the history of Wyoming in time, you sign a $150 bonus for a lease, you're saying, maybe something happens, but lease will be up in 3 years. But, better than nothing, buy some hay with it. And then all of a sudden you find yourself tied up for, I was saying it was just 5 years, which isn't bad, but if it drags on longer and longer, so I could see some really unwary traps. Notice can be burdensome and onerous sometimes for companies, but notice is not a bad thing for people. What are your thoughts on looking at notice requirements in this situation?
Mr. Chairman, notice requirements in what case? Almost all of these things are all public record. You can find them by the Fluid Minerals Division here in Casper. So I'm not sure what notice you're referring to.
Yeah. So, Mr. Overmueller, when you're brought into a drilling unit, spacing unit, right? Notice is sent to you, certified mail.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, if I understood this correctly, is that when you're getting extensions or moved into one of these federal exploratory units, you may have signed a lease 3 years ago, but don't have any idea that you've been unitized, and I may be understanding that wrong. So I'm asking as a question, how is that notice? Is it any different than the standard that the state of Wyoming holds, through the commission holds its operators to? Is it different, a different standard for the BLM?
I can't answer that question, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Just maybe something we follow up on, have a discussion on. Yeah, go ahead, Senator Byman.
Mr. Chairman, to answer that partially, a lot of it depends on the terms of the lease. I've done so many different leases, just variety. There's not necessarily, we used to have a boilerplate lease back in the day, but it's been, that day's long gone. And so a lot of the leases nowadays, you'll have notice requirements built into the lease. A lot of leases, a lot of lessors now will have in the lease specifically, I will decide on a case-by-case basis whether or not I want to opt into the unit. So they'll strike the pooling and unitization clause and add riders to the lease. So it's basically, the notice is be on a lease by lease basis.
Okay. All right. No, those were my questions. Thank you for follow-up. And you wanted to address Representative
Yeah.
Gray's question, which is probably addressed better to PAW than, so, yeah,
Yeah, and
please.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I get to that, I just, I'm happy to work on however we can help streamline the BLM in any way. That's, if there's a way we can help speed them up, we're happy to do that. Happy to be a part of those discussions as well. And I do want to address, because I forgot, the assertion that companies can go anywhere they want and do anything they want. There's nothing about federal exploratory units that changes anything about the requirements in state statute about negotiation and bonding on. That's an entirely separate conversation that FEUs do not change that in any way. And as you recall, the issue of bonding on, which is where you come to the commission, you pay a bond in order to have access to the land, that happens in a very, very minute situation when for whatever reason it can't be worked out. And that is a two-way street. And people need to be, people on both sides need to be willing to work in good faith on that, on that. And it's a challenge because of split estate. Again, thank you, federal government, for leaving us with that, but that's where we are. And those are two separate issues that FEUs don't change in any way.
Senator Rothfuss, yes.
On that point, Mr. Obermueller, so is the implication there that the FEU is not stopping any proactive action of development if somebody else wants to come along and move towards production, or is the FEU capable of blocking the rest of the process if it's in place?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I'm not sure I understand your question. Sorry.
Is the FEU, if an FEU is in place and agreed to, and I realize that there's going to be an agreement, so now I've got a region that's identified as the federal exploratory unit. A lot of our previous discussion on permitting has focused around expiration periods and rights that would allow, if production's not taking place in 2 years, then your permit's going to expire, and basically ensuring that there is access to drilling if the owners wish to drill. So the question is whether or not an FEU placement effectively precludes the rest of that process from taking place.
Mr. Chairman. Senator Rothfuss, yeah, thank you. This is the discussion that was had prior to lunch, mostly about and that the chairman is alluding to on the timing, the 6-month timing, the 5-year timing, all of that, which does, particularly in the example Ms. Jacobson gave about 50 square miles or whatever, if you are in the northeast quadrant and the one well is drilled in the southwest, and then they extend that time, and then the BLM is slow walking for whatever reason, yeah, you're in that unit, and that is the rules of the game once you've elected to be in that unit at that point. So again, is that ideal? Maybe not. Is there a way to correct that via the BLM? That's tricky. And is there a way to correct it in a way that actually helps people explore there? Maybe not. The obvious solution is tell me where the best production is, and then I'll tell you whether I want to participate or not.
Yeah.
Is it, I guess this is probably going to be pursuant to the terms of the lease, and you may not know, I might look to my good friend over here. Are there generally provisions that would allow a participant to withdraw from the FEU if they determine that 4 or 5 years have passed, for example, and they decide that there would be a better approach, maybe a different consortia, a different unit, something along those lines? Or is that strictly contractual and goes back to the original terms of lease?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm not familiar with how they contract at the end of the day, so I'd have to get back to you on that.
Go
Yeah,
ahead, son.
Mr. Chairman, I would suggest it primarily on a lease-by-lease basis, depending on the wording of the lease. But, you know, when things are running the way they should in a federal unit, exploratory unit, they contract as you go through time. What we're seeing with the problems that Ms. Jacobson's discussing is those units aren't contracting like they're supposed to contract. So if you're way up in the hinterlands of a 50,000 acre unit and the production's happening at the complete opposite end, the lease that's say it's a federal lease, that lease should be getting segregated to a new serial number with a new effective date 5 years from the time of segregation.
Right.
That's not happening. So that's on the BLM. So the BLM's not necessarily following their own rules on if that makes sense.
Yep.
And I'm not sure which of you two this is for, but one challenge that I'm having is really understanding what authority the state has under this FEU process. We seldom have much, but would it be within our power, for example, to provide requirements for a kick-out provision after a year? I'm being arbitrary here. I'm just trying to see what is within our scope and authority. Or would that be something that would be preemptively governed by the feds with regard to FEUs, where once you're in, you're federally obligated to be in, or something along those lines? I'm trying to find out what statutory authority or what authority we have as a state.
So I think, Senator, you know, the concept one of learning about these was the goal of this meeting, then to start asking those questions. And as we move to our later is, okay, what, you know, you know, some may disagree with me, but I think I would like having the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission encourage development and ensure accountability for production and all the protections that it does for our citizens. You know, to the extent there is a primacy component, I think is what you're asking, is available, that is something we ought to look at and see if that would be advantageous with the balance of policies that we know regarding, you know, industry being able to feel comfortable moving forward and exploring areas, and then also how we get around what I think we, you know, without throwing rocks, but as we run into with the federal government on any agency is foot dragging, things taking 5 times longer than it should to move forward. And I think that's a worthwhile thing for us to look at. And Mr. Obermuller probably is not ready to answer those questions today, but he could be in a month.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, the only thing we have control of is the APD. Isn't that correct? That's the only thing we issue in these issues. The state, I mean.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, there are state permits, of course, associated with all of these. Yeah, but it is in the, as Mr. Degenfeller said, it is in the Mineral Leasing Act. It's a federal, FEUs are a federal process.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, all that said, let me just answer Representative Gray's question from before about why our drilling rigs aren't higher than we'd all like them to be at this point, real quickly on that. That is the question of the day I get asked most often. And Mr. Chairman, I reject kind of monocausal explanations for anything. And so I'm going to give you 5 reasons. And all these reasons are more important or less important depending on the operator and their location. But to some extent, all 5 of these reasons are playing into that. Reason number 1, at this point, we have an openly hostile federal government to drilling for oil and gas on federal lands. Last week, when they finally got around, after 5 consecutive quarters of not leasing, to issue leases, the majority of the leases that were issued in Wyoming. It's still a fraction of what was nominated back a year or so ago. But in that release, Press Secretary Psaki said that it is the policy of the Biden administration to ban future oil and gas leases on federal lands. They only did this because they were required to by the court. Second, related to the first, but the second issue is capital constraints, the access to capital. They're tied together because the administration is actively seeking to make it more and more difficult, if not impossible, for operators to access capital in order to do the kind of expensive drilling programs that Mr. Degenfelder talked about. And that is a challenge for us, for sure. Three, we are not immune to the workforce issues that everybody else is facing too. It is increasingly difficult to find people to do the work that needs to be done in order to stand up rigs and maintain them and keep programs going. Four, we are not immune to the supply chain issues. Steel is hard to come by, drill pipe is steel, and a myriad of other raw materials that we need to do our work is harder to get and slower to get. And five, prior to the bust of 2020, which I think is easy to forget how much money was lost in that. But prior to that, lots of companies were leveraged very heavily in order to try to build out their drilling programs. And when the bust happened and bankruptcies happened and all of that, the question was, well, why did these guys operate outside of their cash flow? Well, now decisions are being made based on cash flow. We lost so much money during 2020 and 2021 that we're barely recovering from that now. And making capital decisions is expensive. And companies are trying to be prudent with their resources and to not overextend to put us back into an oversupply situation. So all of those things combined work together to make to make drilling in Wyoming have a pretty big headwinds. But we're pushing through those headwinds. And there's a lot of places, including down in south central Wyoming, where production is coming back online, drilling is coming back online. The Powder River Basin is going pretty well. 3 rigs running in Sublette County drilling for gas. So it's coming back. There's headwinds, but we'll continue to fight through those. Thanks for the opportunity to answer that question, Mr. Chairman.
That's fine. Okay. All right, well, thank you, committee. We'll move on to our next topic item. We appreciate the indulgence of everybody who's here for it. Mr. Fuller, I believe, Director Cooley, is it, and then Holly McCamey Simone and Kathy Conley are all appearing by Zoom. They have pre-registered timely, I might add. So,
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, they should be able to turn their cameras on and appear on the screen.
okay. So, you know, when we took up this topic, we had asked Senator Wassenberger to take the lead. Unfortunately, he had a medical appointment today. I think he'll be here tomorrow is a plan, and we'll let him comment. We should have time tomorrow. But with that, we do have an LSO overview prepared. So Mr. Plum, you want to give that to us real quick? And then, I don't know. And Director, sorry for, I hate to keep people on hold, but we're talking oil and gas issues, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Luke Plum, LSO. So yes, I did just prepare the topic summary on the apprenticeship programs, specifically looking at Wyoming Statute 166901 and 902, where this language is provided. And I also went a little bit into the rules that were promulgated by the Department of Workforce Services. And so speaking on that, the primary purpose of this apprenticeship program is to incentivize the use of apprentices on public works projects. This program was originally enacted in 2005. I believe it was implemented by Workforce Services in 2006. And you did receive a letter from them, from the Department of Workforce Services in the meeting materials that it doesn't seem that this program has been utilized. But getting into the actual components of the program, Wyoming Statute 166901 just provides some definitions that I'll reference as we go through 166902, where really the basics of it is that the state or the University of Wyoming, a community college or school district that has a public works project that would estimate to cost at least $1 million or more are eligible for this program. And essentially, the point is that a contractor can have their bid viewed as 1% lower than the actual cost of their bid if they commit to use apprentice labor hours, and it has to be 10% of the total hours worked on the project. If they do so, they can receive apprentice utilization preference, and essentially that gives them some favor as a bidder if they commit to using this, apprentice labor, and that it's going to be 10% of the hours that are actually worked. For a contractor to be able to submit a bid under this program, they are required to submit a letter of certification from the U.S. Department of Labor Bureau of Apprenticeship and Training Standards. And if they do commit to use the apprentice labor and then are awarded the contract, their bid is actually at the amount that they would be awarded the bid at the actual amount. It's viewed as 1% less, but then they get the actual dollars there. So yes, the set is that it is 10% of the labor hours by apprentices. The Department of Workforce Services can grant good cause exemptions if a contractor fails to meet those required percentage of apprentice labor hours. Those are further explained in rule, primarily that you cannot receive a good cause exemption for failing to provide your letter of certification from BAT, but you can receive a good cause exemption if you can show that there was a lack of available apprentices in your area for your project. And a contractor, there are set standards in the rules that, there's such things as you have to show your recruitment efforts, when and where you did those types of things. And it gives further information about how you could go about receiving a good cause exemption. And so essentially, if a contractor does operate under this program and they can show that they complied with the 10% requirement of apprentice labor hours, or if they had a good cause exemption, at the completion of the project, they just have to submit that statement to the department and the awarding agency within 15 days. However, if they fail to comply with the program requirements and they cannot show that they had a good cause exemption, then the Department of Workforce Services must notify the awarding agency, and per administrative rules, the awarding agency has to hold on to that 1% of the contract dollars in case of noncompliance, and those are only released upon a showing of compliance by the contractor. So basically, if a contractor fails to meet the requirements, they can forfeit that 1% of the contract, and that would just go back to the awarding agency through whatever mechanism that they received the funding for the project. And so then there's just some other details under this program, statutorily and under the administrative rules. The Department of Workforce Services is required to assist state agencies who want to award contracts under this program. They must collect and track data related to the program and provide an annual report to the Labor and Education Committees. But yeah, this hasn't been happening too regularly because this program has not really been utilized. And then I just did note that under Wyoming Statute 166902, there used to be an F that required, a subsection F, that required the Department of Workforce Services to see if there was need for a creation of a state program to assist employers in using more apprentices. However, that was repealed as part of a larger bill draft in 2008. But I think that covers that portion of it. I would stand for questions.
All right, thank you for that overview. So who's going to take the lead on this, sir?
So, Mr. Chairman, Jason Wolf with the Department of Workforce Services. I might turn it over to Director Cooley, but just want to be on hand.
Okay, I thought you were a work comp guy. Okay. Good enough. All right. So Director Cooley, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Robin Cooley. I'm the director of the Wyoming Department of Workforce Services. It's a pleasure to be here. I am here along with Mr. Jason Wolf, who is our Workforce Standards Program Administrator, as well as I know we have in the room our newest member, and I'd like to introduce her as well, our newest administrator of our Policy Research and Communications unit with Miss Kari Eakins. Thank you so much for being there, Kari. Also on video, we've got our administrator of our Workforce Programs Division, Miss Holly McCamey Simone. What we'd like to do, Mr. Chairman, with your indulgence, is I'll just briefly explain the letter. But then I would like to have Administrator Wolf go through the process in his unit, that the preference unit that speaks to and has developed for the existing statute. And then I would ask Administrator McCamey Simone to also speak to you about the efforts that we are undergoing to develop apprenticeships in Wyoming outside of this preference arena, but I know that that's an important topic for Wyoming. And in fact, the reason that we are appearing today by video is Miss Administrator McCamey Simone and I are working with a team that worked over the weekend to get a grant application ready to submit for the Apprenticeship Build America grant, which I think could be a really remarkable grant for Wyoming to really build on what her team has already done. So with that, Mr. Chairman, if that's all right, I'll get started.
Yeah, go ahead, Director. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, in looking at the reports that we are required to submit to the committee, we felt this was the year, maybe because of the age of this statute and the lack of response to it, maybe this was the year to really submit a letter, let you know that it has not been utilized, and to my knowledge, we've never even received questions relating to this preference statute. But the statute itself does ask us to provide ideas and suggestions around the statute. So we thought maybe this was a good idea or a good opportunity to do that, given the development of apprenticeships and internships in Wyoming these last couple of years, and where we really want to go with those in Wyoming. But as you can see from the letter, it's not even, we don't get questions about it. It's never been utilized to our knowledge or anyone in the agency that's been there throughout the term of the statute. Never even any questions about, we don't even get us so far as to be able to grant a good cause exception for any of these, because to our knowledge, there's never been an application. So thus that was the impetus for the letter. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Administrator Wolf to talk through the process in his unit about how they would go about doing this, the process through the rules, and his preference team. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, Jason Wolf, Administrator for Workforce Standards with Workforce Services. So I do oversee the section, what we call the preference unit, which also handles the contractor and state labor preference. This particular statute, 166902-901, is one of those preference statutes that falls under that preference group's purview. And again, as the director alluded to, a bit of, I think, have this, so our folks, our preference folks attend to all the public pre-bid meetings, they call them. And we hand out a simple letter that kind of explains all of the preference programs, this one included. And I think what you'll hear from some folks in the room, as to why it's not utilized is fairly onerous, I think, for the employers to take advantage of. I think there's also some in our simple assertion in the letter, you'll see, we were required by statute to provide some ideas for statutory changes. Whether or not those will work, I don't know. But the $1 million threshold seems to be somewhat of a, an oddity within the preference statutes. For instance, when you're, applying for the 5%, Wyoming preferred contractor preference, there's not a dollar threshold on that. Whereas with this particular statute, to utilize the apprentices, there is that $1 million threshold. So again, kind of the, quick and easy function of it is we simply just have not had, at least in the time I've been, with the agency, anybody take advantage of this. I would say, despite our trying to sell it when we go to the pre-bid meetings and making people aware of it through our letter that explains all of the preference programs, unfortunately, there just hasn't been a contractor that has taken advantage of it. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd certainly stand for any questions.
Go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, what's a $1 million threshold? Is that $1 million of labor or the price of the project?
Mr. Chairman, is by statute, $1 million contract.
So go ahead, Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wolf, so do you have any idea why the program's not being utilized?
So, Mr. Chairman, up until recently, no, we did not. And I think you'll hear from some other folks in the room who have more to do with the contracting side of that as to why it's not utilized.
I mean, it's simple to me. We've got a program that doesn't work. Nobody wants to utilize it. No one even asks about it. You punt, you throw it out. But that doesn't mean we don't get busy trying to figure out an apprenticeship system in Wyoming that could be effective for industry and our youth. Agree with that?
Mr. Chairman, yes, absolutely. And I think the director spoke to that. I don't know what the right way to incentivize the use of apprenticeships is. There may be some answer to that. I'm not quite sure what that is. I just don't think this is tying the to a bid preference. I don't know that it's working. I don't know that it will ever work. But surely there's something, maybe some other ways we can incentivize the use of those apprenticeships.
Well, and I think that's what we need. Director Cooley and I and Representative Conley and a lot of people I know in the audience, we've had these discussions. What can we do, right? So I know Workforce Services has grants for what I would just call, we utilize them at Wyoming Sugar. We send people to Sugar End School and Beat End School to enhance their abilities to move up in the pay scale. There are the internship programs have been utilized by the college students. I actually think we're going to try to apply for one of those this year with our company. Those are all good things. A year or two ago, I forget, we had some exceptions within the work comp statutes to cover the workers, like with the internship program we do at Wyoming Sugar for 16-year-olds that come in under mentorship. There are things we've discussed. There are things we can do. And I think what I don't want to do is, or what I would like to see us avoid is 10 people going on 10 different tracks with it. We need to all get on the same track. And I think industry and workforce services are probably two that can align better on this particular issue than working with community colleges and all the other acronym programs we want to set up in education, K-12 and higher education. And so I guess that's what I'm looking for is, hey, workforce development, right? What are you guys doing? What are your ideas? Help us.
So, Mr. Chairman, with that, I think perhaps Administrator Simone can kind of get into some of what we are doing as an agency to get these apprenticeships going and rolling. That's
and trust my comments. I know you are. I know you're working on. I'm not being critical. How do we take it to the next level is what I'm asking. Administrator Simone?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thanks, Jason. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wanted to briefly let you know what we've been doing on apprenticeship. We currently, one of the units I oversee is the business training and support unit. You mentioned some of the great programs out of there, our training grants, our internships, but we also have apprenticeship state expansion grant within that unit. And that's really for us to expand those apprenticeships, work with Department of Labor and work with our employers to really stand up those programs and expand the existing ones that we already have in place. This was the first time we had that grant available to us, and we are finishing up our third year in that. We've decided to expand the employer incentive. So originally it was $300, and now we have upped that to $1,000. And that has proven to be helpful with some of our employers. Some of the costs that they have and incur with onboarding apprentices can get costly. And so that up to $1,000 for a new hired apprentice has proven substantially positive. In the last couple of days, we've obtained or received 30 new applications for apprentices. And so we're trying to wrap up this grant and make sure we end on a positive note. Of course, you know, our industries that we focus on and tend to have more apprentices are plumbing, electrical, and HVAC. But we are partnering with employers as well as educational entities and training entities to expand that to other industries such as technology and cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, also healthcare related industries. And then we are also in discussions on early childhood apprentices as well. So those are some pretty new avenues that we've been researching and have a lot of interest in those. And we're working with DOL to solidify those as well. And then as Director Cooley mentioned, moving forward, we are submitting our application for Apprenticeship Builds America, and that goes in today. And that will help us with a system that's really going to help us track and get those application and grant dollars out quickly. And then also build that pipeline, starting with pre-apprenticeships in the schools. One of the new avenues I forgot to mention was a possible apprenticeship in the teaching field. And we've talked about, can we get some of those youth interested in teaching and do some pre-apprenticeship things in the schools, but then also look at our paraprofessionals and substitute teachers who may already have college credits, and could we expand on that as well? So we're really trying to turn over every rock and make sure we partner with our industries and employers and move this forward in a positive way for Wyoming. Because as we know, not every career path has to involve college. It can be those skilled trades along with things that we don't think of for expanding apprenticeships.
Senator Cooper?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure who to address this question to here, but as we use the term apprenticeship, somebody needs to really tell me what we're talking about, because Mr. Greer's idea, Representative Greer's idea of an apprentice is probably different than mine. Mine varies quite a bit from the union apprentice. So what qualifies a new employee as an apprentice, and how long do we keep them in the apprenticeship program? Do we have any guidelines for that?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, so we work with Department of Labor, Mike Broad, and we focus on those registered apprenticeships. So there is some criteria for that, and there is industry standards for that we have to adhere to. And there is a little bit of a process, but one of the great things our ASE or Apprenticeship State Expansion team can do is to help them navigate that paperwork and navigate those criteria. Now, we do have other programs such as an internship and even a work experience in some of our other workforce programs that can help someone just get their feet in the door, have that experience on the job, and make sure that's the career path that they want to go down. Did that answer your question?
What, and I think that this, the makeup of this committee is different than most, is we're all really interested in results in our businesses and having people available for our workforce. Is pretty true right across this whole board. So I use the term internships because I'm working with high school students or college students and helping bring them along and maybe push them into a certificate program. The concept of the apprenticeship, right? So we always think of that in the electrical field, and then you talk about the Department of Labor, the key HVAC, plumbing. What I think we're interested in is how do we get somebody that can come on so it's more on-the-job training with a mentor, teaching, learning a skill set, hitting maybe an objective set of criteria, these, key performance indicators or skill set. And then boom, they've got, they have a certificate that now allows them, if need be, to be able to change jobs and change jobs, not at $12 an hour, but at $28 an hour and have that skill set. That's what I want to see the state of Wyoming do. Is that, Senator Cooper, you're shaking your head, yes. Am I hitting along the lines? And that's from driving a truck to working in a lab at the hospital, learning how to run heavy equipment, the essentials of welding.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah,
Mr.
yeah,
Chairman.
go ahead. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I think that you've hit on exactly one of the differences between the apprenticeship and the internship. With the apprenticeship, I think in a lot of those, that's what you're going to see is the structured learning experience that allows them to go through a process, an on-the-job process with a mentor that does move them through that process toward that job that is that really well-paying, good job in that field that they've decided they're very interested in. The internship is that entry-level position that really just gets their feet wet, lets them determine, is this the job that I'm interested in? Is this something I really want to go into? We've used it with some of the entrepreneurs, for instance, at UW that have, they've started their own business and they're just overwhelmed. They're trying to grow their business. So getting them an internship an intern in to help them, that's a structured learning experience for the intern, but they're not at that point where they're going to grow in that position. They're just getting their feet wet in that particular industry to determine, is that really where they want to go? But a lot of times what's happening with that internship is they're getting interested in that new job and interested in working with that entrepreneur, and they want to stick with that entrepreneur in that business. So from there, maybe that's where we develop the apprenticeship. But I think when I differentiate those in my mind, that's how I kind of parse them out, if that helps at all.
No, I agree with you. I think those are good comments. Director, I just, so you guys are online and heard the earlier discussion about dealing with the Bureau of Land Management and 2 or 3 year lag on figuring out production on a well, right? So when I hear Department of Labor, I all of a sudden start having these concerns, okay? Why do we have to work with the Department of Labor? Why can't we not have a Wyoming system? Now, the beauty of the Wyoming system is that the trained worker, if she leaves her job and wants to go somewhere else, she's going to have more motivation to, guess what? Stay in the state of Wyoming, because that's where the certificate will be recognized. Now, that's not all bad, is it?
Mr. Chairman, excellent point. And to that point, we have a lot of that type of certificate programs that they're developing in the community colleges and at UW. We've helped fund, for instance, they've got a construction workforce training program they started at UW. That's exactly what they do, is they go through these processes, and at each process they get a certificate, and it builds on itself through that process. So I think you've got in Wyoming this development across the state of a mix of these different opportunities for students. Do we need to expand on them and maybe look at some of these opportunities, building them up a little bit more? Sure. But I think you've got a mix of all of these things happening across the state. But your comment as it relates to bringing this all together so that we can make sure that we're not, there's not redundancy and that we're not recreating the wheel, I think is very important. And that's part of actually the Education Attainment Council, where we've got part of what we do is report in on some of those certificate programs. And part of what we do is report in on some of these other opportunities. But yes, having one place where we bring that all together so that students, so that parents, so that industry, employers and employees know where they go for different types of opportunities like this is going to be very valuable.
So Director, I'm going to touch a real nerve with probably quite a few people. And certificate programs at the community colleges and UW are fine. But we start talking and getting into credentialing, and all of a sudden the time goes up fourfold and the cost goes up eightfold. What I'm looking at is, why can't, my lead welder or machinist be able to get somebody down the path, especially with welding? Or if someone's working within our technical lab, they can't work through some of those programs without having to take time away from work and go to college, be away from home, be away from their family, the other obligations. Maybe it's something you tie in with 3 days or a week here or there, but to me, we've got things here that just do not fit a mold to really get the workforce that we have in Wyoming properly trained and moving forward. And I'm rambling a little bit, but I don't want to rely on the community colleges and certificate programs. I want to see people coming in with employers with a pathway to be able to learn that skill set. So on-the-job training or apprenticeship, how do we work on that?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, you raise a good point, but my understanding is those certificate programs get them on the ground, get them some basic skills, and then they go into the apprenticeship programs with the employer. And I actually think welding might be one of those particular programs where there are a lot of opportunities across Wyoming to take part in that. And at the end of the day, have that skill where you're going to get out there and you're going to get into a good job, a good paying job in Wyoming. I happen to know someone, just a friend I was talking to this weekend, her son went to some welding classes. He's going to be doing a summer internship around welding with an employer. So I think, these opportunities all fit together. And I agree with you that we need to get together to see how they fit together. But I think there's opportunity there to do that.
Okay, well, thank you, I appreciate it.
Mhm.
Any committee? Sure, I didn't look this way. Go ahead,
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
A couple questions came up. How long do these apprenticeships go? And what do we do? In the 70s, we were desperate for mechanics, technicians, and we signed on with the Department of Labor program that lasted about 6 months in our company. And we discontinued it and continued with our own program, our own trainers. We took in apprentices, started them at a level 1. Every 6 months, we'd increase their pay and send them through different things. We did classroom training. We trained them in every shop that we had. At the end of 2 years, they'd be an accomplished mechanic, and then they'd move from there on to a C, B, A, and a master. Could be making $35 an hour in about 5 years. So that's how long I think an apprenticeship program is. And I know some drilling companies did the same thing because we had conversations with them about what we were doing and how we were doing it. We trained some of their technicians. In fact, True was one of them that we trained on some of their guys in engines and that kind of things. So I think you'll see the union ones are 4,000 to 8,000 hours, and that's about what we were doing also. And I think we're still doing it because there's still a desperate need for technical people. Thank you.
So kind of Representative Conley, do you have any comments? This was the topic you brought to the Minerals Committee. What I'm hearing is our current statute could just be repealed. The question is how do we go forward? Is that?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Kathy Connolly, House District 13. When I received this letter as part of the documentation that came from the department to the Labor Health Committee, as it does every year. I took a look at it, and knowing that we as a body are really supportive of apprenticeships, and to see that this statute wasn't being used made me call DWS, as well as, and I think she's in the audience, Katie Legursky from the Contractors Association, to ask what's going on here. And to find out, honestly, that it's never been used and it's pretty unworkable. And that's the way that you're talking about it. We had several meetings and we did come up with that conclusion, and it probably should be repealed. There's no reason to have something in the green books that isn't workable and makes the appearance that it's valuable when it isn't. It's not doing any harm, but it could be and probably should be repealed. Instead, going forward with the conversation that the committee is having right now makes a whole lot of sense to me. I do want to point out that Director Cooley mentioned the Educational Attainment Council, and that there's reports there that happen in terms of on-the-job training and internships, but know that that council sunsets. I think the last meeting of that council is next month. And so there is no Educational Attainment Council anymore with on-the-job training and internships on its agenda. And so for the committee going forward to get more information about apprenticeships, and it actually, as Ms. Simone mentioned, you know, that, and it was, I think it was Senator Cooper who brought up the language of apprenticeships. What's the difference between how we use that term anecdotally and then how it's used with the programs that exist is something that's important. We in Wyoming do far more with on-the-job training than we do with apprenticeships. And how do we incentivize those? How do we go forward with wanting to keep what we have that's working with the DOL with what we want to do in the state? I think that's a great topic for the committee going forward. But honestly, I think that the statute that's on the books doesn't need to be. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Conley. Okay. So I see some folks I'm sure want to speak on this. So Katie, I can see you in the back, and you and I spoke briefly last week, very briefly.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. I'm Katie Legursky, Executive Director for the AGC of Wyoming, formerly the Wyoming Contractors Association. And with me, I have Lauren Ryman Benford, who's with Ryman Corp., a contractor out of Cheyenne. And just as a little background, it became clear to our members early on that in order to have a workforce in the construction industry, that we needed to train our own workforce. Therefore, the Contractors Association opened a training office in Casper in 1998. In 2001, we expanded that office into the Regional Training Center. We currently train individuals in transportation, CDL, heavy equipment, welding, carpentry, concrete, basic mechanics, safety, and a wide variety of other training courses. In January of this year, we hired a full-time workforce development director, since finding a workforce is our #1 priority for our members. Last year, we migrated from an apprentice program to an on-the-job training program approved by the Federal Highway Administration. We are currently training over 28 trainees who are currently making the prevailing wage in their training area as a trainee. Just this morning, as a total fluke, our workforce development director was visiting with a member of the Wisconsin Department of Workforce Development to learn about Wisconsin's Youth Apprentice Program. In this instance, the word apprentice refers to on-the-job training program, which allows 16 and 17-year-olds, basically juniors and seniors, to be simultaneously enrolled in an academic classes to meet the high school graduation requirements in a youth apprentice-related instruction course, and are also employed by a participating employer under the supervision of a skilled mentor. Our members would like to see a program such as this implemented within the state of Wyoming, which would meet the needs of our employers as well as those in other industries. Just for example, in Wisconsin, There are 6,200 students enrolled. Within Wisconsin, there are 80 career pathways within this apprentice or on-the-job training program. Four of the largest areas of enrollments are healthcare, hospitality, manufacturing, and construction. Of those 6,200 participating students, 80% of them that have graduated, 80% of them have gone on to enroll and find a job within those trades. That's very beneficial from this. This apprentice program, on-the-job training program, is not through the Department of Labor because there is a number of hoops to draw through. So it's a true on-the-job training program. It is mandated through the state of Wyoming, through the Department of Education, but it's actually run through the Wisconsin Department of Workforce Services, which they call the Department of Workforce Development. So just as a fluke, Mr. Chairman, we were in discussions this morning to find out what other states are doing. That is what one state kind of ties into what you talked about a little earlier.
Yeah, go ahead, Senator.
Thank you. I'm curious about how the funding plays through, and really what the program does to provide incentives. If it's a good model, I'd like to know more details about how it's actually implemented.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, we just had initial discussions with the Wisconsin Department of Workforce Development just this morning in initial conversations with them. It wasn't something that we had planned on discussing. It was just a member of my staff visiting with them this morning. It kind of just tied into the discussions. So it was just an example of what another state is doing. I know it is funded from their state legislature. I can't remember what the numbers are. We can definitely get some additional information, bring it back to you, get some whatever information we can ensure it. It was just an example of what some of the other states are doing with some of the on-the-job pre-apprentice programs throughout. So I just thought I would present that since it was very timely to this discussion. But as far as the apprentice utilization program, there's a very good reason why a contractor hasn't utilized that in the past 16 years. A prime example, Cary Junior High, it's a construction project I'm sure that most of the legislators here in this room are very familiar with. That was an 18-month project. It had 38 subcontractors on that project. That does not include the second, third, fourth tier subs. At the height of the construction, there was anywhere from 100 to 150 employees on that construction project at any one time, which means that there would have to be at least 5 full-time apprentices on that project at any one given time. So when you figure out the number of labor hours, that general contractor would have to have at least 20, if not more, apprentices on that project. So that means that at the very beginning of that project, that the individual or the subcontractor who is doing the dirt work would have to have a laborer who is enrolled in an apprentice program, to the very last subcontractor who is off of that project, which oftentimes is either the landscaper or the individual doing the flooring, would have to have a laborer who would be enrolled in a construction project, in an apprentice program. So with the laborers across the board, it is very unrealistic that a prime contractor could find enough subcontractors that would have enough enrolled apprentices or laborers who are enrolled in apprentice programs to be on that. In order to participate, to get that additional 1% bid preference, you also have to be participating in the 5% bid preference. So contractors at the time of the bid, and Lauren will go into a little more detail what happens on bid night, they also have to make sure that they're meeting the 70% of their subs and their sub-tiers are eligible as a resident contractor. They also have to make sure that now they also meet their apprentice contractors as well too. So right off the bat, we're eliminating a number of subcontractors in order to bid on the project. Contractors, at the time of bid, there's a lot of information that's going on. So in order to be eligible for the additional 1%, we're already trying to be eligible for the 5%, so that additional 1% really doesn't matter when we're already getting the additional 5% if we can find enough of our subcontractors who are in state bidding preference. And Lauren, I'll just turn it over to her very quickly to go into some additional details of why in the past 16 years it's never been implemented. And in reality, we don't believe it ever will be, no matter what kind of changes we possibly can make.
Okay, before we do that, you cover a lot of ground there. And I can see when I saw the 10% that I can understand why it wasn't used right away. You know, let's go back to, with respect to Wisconsin, I sense a little bit of excitement in your voice because it's very much what you and I have talked about over the years. That's almost the program we were looking for. Senator Rothfuss is right on point of, okay, what state funding is necessary? And I'm going to suspect that because it's ran through the Department of Education, that's where the funding goes into K-12 for that continued K-12 education transition. I heard 3 or 4 people so far talk about incentives to employers. So, Ms. Legursky, I'm going to go out on a limb and ask you this question. I seriously doubt your members need incentive to bring on apprenticeships. What they need is a clear path forward to have a good employee. Is that a fair statement?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do the programs you offer at the training center, do you provide certificates after? Of those, what kinds of certificates of completion do you offer in those courses? Are they accredited, or what kind of things do you offer? And are they for horizontal and vertical?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, yes, we do provide certificate for all of our trainings. The majority of our trainings are through the NCCR, which is a national accreditation, and it's nationally recognized throughout the construction industry, both for vertical and horizontal.
Follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess just going off the discussion on your idea from Wisconsin, I just don't understand why we wouldn't have workforce services fold that into what you're already doing, and maybe they can authenticate in some way, make sure that those courses are getting the job done, and put a stamp on there. And it seems like it's already kind of happening. It's just maybe a little more support, a little more coordination, and I'm not sure it really requires that much, if any, cost. Would you disagree with me? Would you agree?
Mr. Chairman, there's a lot of different training aspects, a lot of different career pathways within it. Some of the training that we do up at the training center, it's not for individuals that are within high school, although we are currently working with the Pathways Innovation Center here in Casper. We are training a number of their individuals in heavy equipment. So we are doing that. They are getting national certificates for heavy equipment operation. The Wisconsin program is actually working with high school students, 16 and 17-year-olds, that are giving them a different career path, as well as going through a post-secondary. It's also giving them a career path within the trades, a different type of certificates, as the chairman alluded to keep them here. There's different mechanisms. What we train up in the training center is not necessarily the 16 and 17-year-olds. It's individuals that are coming back that may want to further their education. It's individuals looking that may have been displaced from one. It's oftentimes, yes, a lot of the things that the Department of Workforce Services are doing. We currently do take advantage of a lot of the grant opportunities through the Department of Workforce Services to train those individuals. It's a different type of certificate type training. But it's a little different type of program when we look at training our youth versus what we're currently doing at the training center. So they can go hand in hand. The Wisconsin program would just be another tool in our tool belt to train our youth to go directly into high school, be trained to enter into the workforce. And Ms. Benford here can explain a little more in detail how that's important, because she's seen some of these individuals that are coming into high school that are entering into the workforce, and sometimes they're missing a lot of those skills to be ready to enter into the workforce.
Other questions for Ms. Legursky? Other questions? Other questions? Thank you. Ms. Legursky, do you want to pass that microphone on? Please identify yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lauren Benford with Ryman Corp. Katie asked me to come and speak a little bit about why this program has failed. First, I'd like to just kind of give you a little bit about Ryman. We're a general contractor in Wyoming, not a construction manager at risk. The difference is we do have an employee pool. So currently we have about 125 employees. We get up to 160 around the June time. We have been a part of the apprenticeship program with the DOL for about 20 years and just transitioned to the on-the-job training program that AGC is offering us through the Federal Highways Administration. We find benefit in that. One, a 3-year apprenticeship was a struggle for us because sometimes we don't keep our employees 3 years. We do have a layoff season. We've been working really hard to keep our employees in-house so that they don't get laid off and that we could keep our apprentices through those 3 years. We were not graduating apprentices in 3 years. They were leaving. So we actually got rid of our program and went to on-the-job training. We've had it for a year. We started it last April. We've already graduated 3 people from that program. And the beauty of on-the-job training is it's skill stacking. So you start as an on-the-job training as a laborer, and the next year you come on as a carpenter or as a welder. And so these young employees are really able to create a variety of skills instead of just one for a lifetime. So the next thing I wanted to we did try, in 2010, we did try to receive the 1% for apprenticeship because we do have an apprenticeship program, although we were denied because, one, we couldn't maintain the 10% on the job the entire time because our employees shift. So I wanted to kind of explain the 2 reasons that I don't see this program ever working. One, a workforce varies. So we have 125 people in the field, and on a $10 million building job, we'll have between 3 to 15 people at any given time working on that job. But that's not consistent, and we can't require our subs for us to have oversight over who our subs are requiring on the job. Was something that me and one of my competitors realized that's another full-time position to make sure that that was being utilized correctly and so that we could get that 1% in the end. So that was the first reason. The second was the bidding process, which I think a lot of people don't realize is very convoluted. And many of us work super hard. Not only, we have to focus on the scope of the project to make sure that we are completing every single piece. When you look at this building, I don't think people realize how many subcontractors or vendors, suppliers it takes to complete this. So we're spending weeks deciding who's going to bid it, what kind of coordinating with them, what it looks like to them, their schedule. And then 12 hours before the bid is what we call crunch time, and it is chaos. So we're putting together and trying to compare 2 different mechanical subcontractors to make sure that they have the same scope and that we're not having what we call scope gaps. And then we have to evaluate whether currently they are an in-state contractors so that we can maintain our residency. And those 2 things right now are chaotic. And there's sometimes when we are running to the building to hand you our bid and we are writing it in as we're running up the stairs because that's how quickly things change. And when we tried to do this apprenticeship program, the reason we missed it was because we didn't even evaluate the whole 10% on the job, 10% of the labor force on the job, which we would have never met because of our 5 apprentices, they probably would have made up maybe 2 or 3% of the labor on that job. So it's not something that is not important. We recognize it. We know that if we want to be successful, we have to have a workforce, and the key to our workforce is definitely the training programs. So a couple of opportunities I wrote down. I do think the DWS has some great programs. The internship is one. We utilize it now. I know they just up some of the dollar amounts for continuing education. I think it went from like $1,000 to $4,000. We utilize that all the time for guys that have been working for us 10 years and want a CDL. And so I think just opportunities to let employees better themselves are the key. Because if they don't want to better themselves and we stick them in a program that they have to do, they're more than likely going to fail. Another program that Katie's actually getting ready to put out for the contractors is we're gonna start mentoring. We're trying to get into high schools to mentor young students because we've tried to hire two 17-year-olds from, they graduated in December. And there's a stumbling block between the handoff between going to school and work. And I don't think it's necessarily our students' fault. I think there's a learning curve between employers and school to actually, so that the students have an expectation of what it's supposed to look like to come to work. So we thought it would be helpful to maybe mentor these students a little bit sooner so that they understand expectations and maybe even drive them in a direction that they didn't initially think was possible. So yeah, and then the last thing I had was on the job training. I think that that's the key right now is it gives our students the opportunity to drive their own careers instead of us telling them how the next 3 years of their lives look, because honestly, they're not gonna take that right now. These students want more control. They want a career path, and so on-the-job training gives them a career path, but at their own fingertips. So that's what I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Any questions, committee? Okay, well, thank you. We probably got some homework for you, Katie. Or we'll get you with Brian and follow up on what Wisconsin's doing, and maybe
You bet,
even,
Mr. Chairman.
maybe even at our next meeting, see if someone from Workforce Services there would be willing to come and explain, and maybe same way with Robin with your office, reach out and see what they're doing. And again, we got a pretty good turnaround, a pretty short turnaround between this meeting and the next one. Be nice to flesh that out and explore it a little bit more and get a better feel
And
for
Mr.
it.
Chairman, there's multiple programs that other states are running, and we could probably look at what's out there and provide some additional information on what some of the other states are
Yeah.
doing as well.
Yeah, I bet they'd be, with those numbers, I bet they would be excited to share their success story.
Absolutely, and we're happy
Yeah.
to help.
Okay, who else wishes to testify? Come on up.
Good afternoon. Oh, it's bright behind you guys. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Tammy Johnson. I'm the Executive Director for Wyoming State AFL-CIO. And with me is Dan Meyer, who's the Job Training Center Director for the Plumbers and Pipe Fitters out of Cheyenne, and Brenda Page, who is the Director for the IBEW Electrical Workers Training Center here in Cheyenne, or here in Casper, sorry. Real quickly, I wanted to make a few comments, and then I'd like to let them explain to you a little bit about their programs and ask you, have you guys asked them any questions about our current apprenticeship programs that we have in the state of Wyoming. I did provide you with a handout that summarizes 6 of the union apprenticeship programs that we have in the state right now. Looks like this. My teacher person is coming out of me. And so this just summarizes for you sort of what the program is, what it addresses, what the wages are that the apprentices make as they go through the program. As you can see, most of these are at no cost to the attendees, the students in the apprenticeship program, and they're out in the job, on the job, getting their training, as well as doing classroom work. So I think I tried to break it down with classroom hours and on the job hours, and then the wages that they earn as an apprentice and then as a journeyman. And then the distinction between a lot of other programs is the benefits that are provided. So I'll let my colleagues explain to you those in more detail. But I wanted to share with you a few insights that I've gathered since I left my education position and came into this one. And I love hearing the conversation about how we can dovetail this with the schools. Fraught with a few complications, but certainly a way we should try to look at this. In Wyoming, we're able to train workers, but it's really difficult to keep them here once we train them. And I think we're going to see that that's kind of at the heart of our workforce development issue, is we do get them trained. We do that at the University of Wyoming, and what happens to them after we pay them to go to college? They leave, right? Why are they leaving? I think there are myriad answers to that, but one of them is wages. I come to you today on what is Thursday is Workers' Memorial Day, and I don't know if you realize this, but Wyoming leads the nation in on-the-job deaths. We are 4 times the national average in our on-the-job death rate. And the reason I bring this to you is because when we talk about apprenticeship programs and training programs, there's a significant safety component that's involved in training that Department of Labor apprenticeship programs require significant safety training. And not all of our apprenticeship programs in the state are Department of Labor certified or registered apprenticeship programs. So it's important to think about that as we talk about the quality of apprenticeship programs. And as a side note, we're hosting on the steps of the Capitol on Thursday a memorial for those 35 workers who lost their lives in Wyoming in 2020 on the job. So if you're around Cheyenne and you're able to stop by and join us in that, it's going to be a very somber but notable and important occasion to mark for those workers. So I'd like to let my colleagues explain to you the apprenticeship programs that they have in their work and answer any questions that you may have. And then we can continue to tell you that we're here to be part of the solution and to help get workers trained. We want them as much as you do. We have a $1.2 billion infrastructure investment in a nuclear reactor plant that's going to be going into Kemmerer in a very short time. We need to get that workforce developed. I have spoken with the superintendent at Kemmerer High School in the Lincoln County School District, and she is guns about getting some kind of apprenticeship program at the high school. So we could get, just imagine if we could get some young people trained in plumbing and pipe fitting and welding right now, electricians that could then segue into that program. And so those guys are ready to go when that project starts in 4 years. If you look at the timeline of these apprenticeship programs, we're right on track. So we're in the game to be in it and win it and help you guys figure out the solution and get some workers trained and up and running in this state. So I'll let Brenda start first. She's with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee members. First of all, I want to apologize. I'm suffering from a sinus infection, so please bear with me. Again, my name is Brenda Morgan. I am the training director for the Wyoming Statewide Electrical Joint Apprenticeship and Training Committee. That is a collaborative effort between the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Unions, Local 322 and 415 based in Cheyenne, and the National Electrical Contractors Association based in Casper, but it's also statewide. We are a 4-year schooling program plus 8,000 hours of paid on-the-job training. And I always tell people when I do group presentations, I was shocked when I started working at the JATC to find out this program has been in existence since 1965 in Wyoming. I wish I had known about it when I started working there. I probably would have been an electrician if I was in high school and had found out about it. So a little bit of background on me. I grew up in Wyoming, went to community college, kind of went into a clerical aspect of it, and ended up at the JATC. I am married to an electrician who went through this program over 28 years ago. So it has provided a sustainable living wage for us to stay in Wyoming. And working at a community college, I worked in admissions. So my goal is to make sure as many people in this state know about this amazing opportunity, what I call best kept secrets. Actually going to Cheyenne tomorrow to a career fair to talk to kids at high school and people in the community about apprenticeship, because if anything, it provides a livable wage. An apprentice in our program starts out at $15.85 per hour. And because we are a registered apprenticeship program with the Department of Labor, what that tells people is if you are brought into our program, you're going to get on-the-job training, you're going to get education, your wage is going to go up as you get that experience. So that is the benefit of being in a registered apprenticeship program. They also earn a Department of Labor completion certificate. That is recognized nationwide, okay? So one of the benefits of being a registered apprenticeship program, we really tell them, if you're thinking about apprenticeship, check into that. Is it registered? Does it have those standards to protect you, let you know what you're going to make as you go through the program? And again, our program is International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers and NECA. What that means is our electrical contractors pay 2% of all of their electricians' wages to fund our training program. Therefore, we're able to offer this training program to our apprentices essentially free of charge. Charge them a couple little registration fees, things in there, but they are not incurring educational debt while they go through this program. The contractors are investing in them. And it averages out to about over $270,000 over a 4-year period. They're given health benefits while they go through the program. Hanson Apprentice, just an example, the minimum wage they can make is $15.85 per hour. On top of that, our contractors pay their health and retirement benefits on top of that. So a first-year apprentice in the state of Wyoming, minimum they can make is going to be $24.34 per hour, okay? So for a union contractor, what that means is we're competing with contractors who may not necessarily pay that livable wage or provide those benefits. So it is harder for us to train apprentices. I currently run about 100 apprentices in our program. I have over 69 people who want to get into the program. We bring apprentices in once our contractor is able to put them on the job, has a job that they can put them on. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. We have to have the journey workers available at a contractor. We have to have the work available to train those apprentices because they're supervised by either a journeyman or a master electrician for safety and for full educational purposes. So that's kind of my elevator speech about that. But like I said, we currently run about 100 apprentices statewide. That's about 22 contractors that utilize our training program. There could be more, but they do struggle with attaining, different jobs, competing with all the different contractors. But we value safety and we value wages and a livable wage in Wyoming. So that's kind of my recruitment elevator speech, and I'm open to any questions you might have.
All right. Thank you. So Mr. Meyer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Dan Meyer, Training Director of Plumbers and Pipe Fitters and HVAC Technicians. We're based out of Cheyenne, but our jurisdiction is all of Wyoming, the Panhandle of Nebraska, and the western half of South Dakota. We are a 5-year program, and it consists of 8,500 hours of on-the-job training and 1,230 related instruction hours. And those basically follow the school district's school year. So we'll do 2 semesters a year, 123 hours a semester, which breaks down to about Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. We'll do 3 hours a night from 6 to 9. So the students will come in, they'll go to work and then come to school on those days. And if they're out of town, just for example, Gillette, when they were building the power plant up there, we rented a building and did all the training up there with our instructors. It's an accredited program through ACCE, and the starting wage is $20.98. They also get insurance after the 300 hours work to get that insurance started. But one of the good things about Mike Broad, the Department of Labor, kind of overseeing us and helping us follow our standards, is that she is there, but there is a lot of flexibility to meet industry's changing demands. So if there's a lot of pharmaceutical work going around the country right now, not necessarily in Wyoming yet, but there could be. So we can switch gears and put the training more into orbital welding or tube bending, specific tasks that are needed at the time. We don't have to go to a committee and ask to change that. I'm a 24-year pipe fitter. I live here in Wyoming. I went through the apprenticeship program. I used to deliver pizzas and Chinese food, and got into the apprenticeship program and worked all over the great state in Naughton or Kimmer to down the road here in the power plant. What's it called? Dave Johnson. And from Alaska to Minnesota and everywhere in between. I've had to travel quite a bit just because there wasn't always work here in Wyoming. But the program is hands down. You can't compete a registered apprenticeship program with one that's not. So the training is all high class, top class, and all the certifications are through industry, the top industry accreditations. If it's welding, medical gas training, backflow training, all the welding certifications. So thank you.
Nope, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I noticed you only have 3 in the iron workers and 18 in the plumbers and pipe fitters. I'm thinking that's the 2 of them. You got 21, and the electricians have 98. Is that is that a function of the seasonal work that your guys do and you don't have year-round apprentices?
Yes, no, I think there was quite a bit more. We had around 40 when COVID started. We had a good presence at the refinery in Cheyenne. We've done a lot of the outages at all the power plants in Wyoming, and that has gone away. And it irks me too, because all those jobs at the refinery, a small percentage are Wyoming employees, union or not. They're bring them all in from out of town. And that's, that's tough, because there's a lot of trained professionals right here in our state that are now out of a job and having to travel elsewhere. But that's why our numbers are down right now. We've had as many as over 100, but yeah, right now we're slow.
Okay. Senator Rothfuss?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And I see that there's a small nominal fee charged basically to cover costs for the apprenticeship, but where does the funding come from for your program? She went into some detail. I'm just curious about the same analysis for your program.
Yeah, so we do charge the apprentices $200 a semester, and that helps go towards, it doesn't cover all, but it helps cover some books and materials. But it is a contractor contribution that funds the training department. And that is, it's $1.50 an hour off the total package, goes toward the training.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may add, so you see there's a clear difference between what goes on with a apprenticeship program when there are union contractors involved than what you might see with contractors that aren't involved in a union program. The costs to each are different. The contract that's developed between the apprenticeship program, the apprentices, and the contractor is different. So, for example, the portion that Ms. Morgan was sharing with you about the benefits, that's provided in the contract, but the employer pays that. So that may not be part of the deal with another contractor, so the cost is less to a non-union contractor, but the benefit to the employee may be different. So, and then, of course, the cost of the program is part of the deal. So whether that comes off the wages of the, ultimately the wages of the worker or the out of the pocket of the contractor is sort of tomato or tomato, because the end game is the money that goes, is the total cost of the contract. So it's all very Greek and new to me as well, but it's fascinating to me that industry, the labor unions, the workers have found a way. And I guess I'm here to tell you that we've heard industry and we hear workforce services, and there's a third portion to this, and that's the workers, that's the laborers. And the workers have found historically in this country, and even before this country was founded, a way to train their own and to feed them and clothe them and house them and give them all the basic necessities while they're learning. And that's the apprenticeship programs that started back in the 1500s in England. And they started and became just like this. And historically, unions have been the ones who've been sort of the structure where that goes for the trades. It's not the only place, but it's been one that's been very successful. And the U.S. Department of Labor, Chairman Greer, is not in there to get in the way, as the BLM may be right now with oil and gas leases. They're in there to ensure that high quality standards are met and that workers are safe on the job, and that callbacks don't happen, and that the job is done right the first time, and those kinds of things. So we've never viewed the Department of Labor as an interference, but more as a great support and a great guidance to the work that has to be done and the training that has to be done. So to ask them to get out of the way would probably compromise the high set of standards that we have for those programs. And so that is not something that we would advocate. Kind of in closing, I just wanted to share with you a notion, a rising tide floats all boats. And in Wyoming, we have a lot of things that are working against workers to make this an attractive place to work. We have great scenery, great hunting. We have all the great things that we enjoy. We have great wind on a day like Tuesday or Saturday if you were here. But what we don't have is great laws that provide for workers. I brought a bill to another committee earlier this year that said, if an employer is going to do what happened at the refinery in Cheyenne, where they lay off all the workers and bring in workers from other states, then why should they get the manufacturing, sales, and use tax exemption? They're not doing for us what we're doing for them. That failed miserably. We've brought other labor-related things to you. Workers' comp, we asked this committee, we asked another committee to take a look. Oh, maybe it wasn't this committee. We asked Judiciary and another committee to look at workers' comp laws. They're not good. You get $10,000 if you die on the job. Does that even cover a funeral? We need to take a look at those laws and talk about what they're doing and how they can be improved and how they can be modernized. So we have the lowest minimum wage in the country. If we raise that minimum wage, even though there's only about 1,900 workers in the state that really work under minimum wage, if we raise that wage, then other wages go up. And then Wyoming is more attractive for workers to come and stay here. I think you've heard that these guys say, a lot of them have had to work out of state when there's no work here or when there's big work here. I know with the nuclear reactor, a big concern is that our prevailing wage is not high enough. And whatever those workers are that are going to come work at that company knows they're going to have to pay higher than prevailing wage just to get the workers to be on that job. Because guess what? They can go somewhere else and make more. So I'm not here to shoot down everything good that we've done, but I just want to let you know there are things within your power to change the lives of workers in this state and working families. And isn't that what we want, is healthy, thriving communities? Governor Gordon's office commissioned a study in December to look at what would happen in Rock Springs if the workers at Unit 2 Bridger were laid off, and the coal miners in association with that. And the doom and gloom of the economy of Rock Springs and Green River from that study, 160 workers, I think, was incredible. The amount of loss that that community would suffer if those guys lost their jobs, and the state. So I think there's great evidence to say that workers are a key factor in our economic development. They are, for every dollar spent, that dollar rolls around in the community 3 or 4 times. But when we hire workers from Texas or Oklahoma or wherever they're coming from on these jobs, that money's not staying here, it's going home. They're living in a man camp and they're living on very little work money. They're spending very little here and they're sending it home. And we're losing that. So we need to do the things that we can do to make this a great state for Wyoming workers to be here. Because they want to be here and they want to stay here. Our plumbers and pipe fitters are all over the country right now working and sending their paychecks back. But they want to be here with their families. They want to tuck their kids in at night. They want to go hunting with their buddies. They want to do all the things that we get to do because we get to work here. So sorry for the emotional pitch, but that's one of my caveats.
Did you have any comments at all on the current apprenticeship statute?
Well, I appreciate you asking. And
Well,
that's a.
We really do. We are behind
There was
on our agenda, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There was a lot of conversation about that before, and we agree with you. Repeal it if it's not working. If it's getting in the way of developing apprenticeship programs. I think early in the conversation, there was a question about what apprenticeship programs do we have? And we wanted to share with you what those are. And this committee is concerned with economic development. Workers are a big part of that. And I'd like to call that to your attention, so.
I'm pretty much aware of that.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you. All right, anyone else to speak on this topic? Okay, we'll move on to our next topic, which is Senator Rothfuss. I'm going to let you take front center stage. This deregulated power zones, which I understand was worked through the blockchain technology, whatever it's called now, committee.
That's the one.
Last year, right?
Yep, Mr. Chairman, yes. So deregulated industrial power zones was worked through the Blockchain Select Committee, and I think we had it in 3 meetings, ended up passing it in its current form, and then brought it to the legislative session. During the interim committee, there was a tremendous amount of discussion, a lot of engagement by the utilities, and I think the bill was certainly intended to be narrow in terms of the implementation and to not influence existing projects and not to be any type of full deregulation. So I'll get to how that works in a moment, walking through what the bill does. There was still concern with some of the aspects of it. There were interests in bringing it to the interim, to this committee by members of the Senate Minerals Committee. So we've brought it back for consideration. The philosophy here, the concept here is that 99 perhaps plus % of the time, our regulated utility structure is great. And there's a tremendous upside to a regulated utility structure. There's predictability, there's protection of individual ratepayers, and there's an assurance that you have an entity, in our case, the Public Service Commission, looking out for the interests of the state and the ratepayers to ensure that anything that's going towards that rate base is going to be appropriate and is going to be then negotiated in the interests of the ratepayer. So most of the time, what we're doing works great. On the Blockchain Select Committee, what we heard, and I think what we've heard in other circumstances before, is that it's not always great. So during the interim, and over the last couple of years, there was a circumstance where China banned cryptocurrency mining. And about 50% of the global mining of cryptocurrency was being done in China at the time. A lot of it for Bitcoin and Ethereum. I don't know if folks are aware right now, but the amount of cryptocurrency in the world right now is in the trillions of dollars. The global market cap is about $1.85 trillion in cryptocurrency right now. So there's a tremendous interest in mining Bitcoin and Ethereum, and those displaced mining units then were looking for a home, and they came to the United States, and in particular, they looked at Wyoming because of the work that we've been doing in recent years in cryptocurrency and blockchain, and wanted, in fact, to come to Wyoming and locate in Wyoming. We do have some that are locating here. The challenge was always power, and the cost of power is the first and foremost consideration in locating cryptocurrency mining operations. Everything else is secondary. On the everything else, though, we're great. We're as good as you can be. Wyoming is as good as you can be on everything other than the power. On the power side, we're not so good. And what it comes down to is that as a first approximation, there's going to be negotiated rates and tariffs by the Public Service Commission for industrial rates. And that's basically you'll pay this amount for your power. And when the cryptocurrency mining operations would look at that, they'd say, no, it's just not good enough. A couple of years ago, I want to say, we passed special legislation through the Blockchain Task Force that provided an opportunity to negotiate better rates under specific circumstances for cryptocurrency mining, but for other things as well. That allowed negotiation with some of the regulated utility providers and cryptocurrency mining operations, and some of those were done in good faith. But the reality is there's also just not a lot of power available in Wyoming for Wyoming consumption because our regulated utility system pre-commits it elsewhere. You only build what you need, and then you book all of that, you sell it, and there's not a lot of excess available. So to give an order of magnitude on what we're talking about, there was at least 2 gigawatts of demand, 2 gigawatts of demand for cryptocurrency mining power that was expressed during the last interim. I don't think we'll meet 20 megawatts of that demand. And we'll have lots of good reasons, and we'll hear from the regulated utilities on why they won't meet it. But at the end of the day, what it comes down to is a regulated utility structure is not conducive to meeting large power purchase requirements. There's no competition. There's no incentive to compete. There's no incentive to meet those needs because the capital assurance has to be 100%. One of the concerns that I realized and that we realized to the Blockchain Select Committee that motivates this legislation is that what we'll effectively have is large gigascale projects that are looking for siting may be interested in Wyoming, But the state of Wyoming doesn't get to enter into that conversation. The conversation is with the regulated utility. Can you provide us with the power? The regulated utility will then make a decision on the creditworthiness of that project on behalf of the entire state for that specific region and give them a thumbs up or thumbs down, where we've seen historically that it's a thumbs down. Large electrical power consumers do not come to the state of Wyoming for good reason. And that's a concern. So this legislation attempts to address that at a modest scale. And Mr. Chairman, just walking through the concept of it, we can go through the specifics of it, but the concept here is to allow the designation of a deregulated industrial power zone, which, as drafted in Senate File 71 from last session, would only be available on a state section of land, 640 acres or more, state land. And the reasons for that were more about complexity of implementation than a philosophy that it'd only be on state land, but trying to keep it clean. It would have to be at the request of county commissioners for a county designating a selected section of state land and saying, we would like that land to be deregulated for purposes of power consumption and use and production. That would then go to the Board of Land Commissioners for the state. State Board of Land Commissioners would ask the Public Service Commission, would this adversely affect ratepayers? And then based on that feedback, they may designate a parcel of land as a deregulated power zone. And if that is done, power consumed on that section would be effectively deregulated, like Texas. Texas has a deregulated structure. You can have multiple entities offering power. There would be potential for bidding. But the other thing that would allow would be power production on that section, assuming that the power is consumed on that section, to also be deregulated. So you could imagine a project, for example, where you had a designated section of land with a bunch of wind turbines on it. Those wind turbines would be able to directly sell for, let's say, hydrogen power generation on that land to a separate company. So there'd be a tremendous amount of flexibility on this designated section, but it wouldn't affect any other supply or demand in the state. If transmission lines to or from that section were to be used to deliver power, that would have to be assessed a fee at a fair market value pursuant to discussion with the PSC. So a lot of thought went into this. It was a tiny carve out, but it was strongly and passionately resisted by our regulated utilities because they don't want literally any change to our regulatory structure. It's worked for them very well for 130 years. They make money year in, year out. And this is a path that is of concern, which I think we'll hear. But Mr. Chairman, the concern I have here is this is not just about cryptocurrency mining. This is about pretty much every project we talk about on this select committee for large-scale economic development is going to consume a large amount of power. Not just a few hundred kilowatts, but megawatts to gigawatts. And if we leave our current system in place, I cannot imagine any company making the decision to come to Wyoming and work within the current regulatory structure and succeed at buying 100 megawatt to gigawatt scale power for something like aluminum synthesis, steel, semiconductor, hydrogen synthesis. We are just not attractive based on a regulatory structure. And again, I'll reiterate, our regulatory structure is great for 99%. It's great for us at home. I don't want it to change at all. But as we're talking about tens of megawatts, it's not a good system. And this might not be the answer. But if we want to take seriously the engagement in giga projects where we're talking about things like petrochemical synthesis or refining of coal, as we've talked about, our system doesn't allow those types of projects because you cannot sell power as a producer directly to a consumer unless it's wholly owned, without going through the regulated utility structure. and absorbing the cost of all of the transmission lines and all of the other infrastructure. So that's the context this comes within. I'm happy to answer any questions about how it works, have a little discussion, but if this isn't the answer, my question would be, what is? Our utilities suggested during the interim that they wanted this to be an interim because they wanted to bring solutions. And candidly, I don't expect any solutions to be brought.
Mr. Co-Chair?
Mr. Chairman, the Senate Minerals Committee did hear this and discussed it a lot and asked it to be an interim subject because we have a regulated system in Wyoming, which means that those organizations that are under that regulation are charged with producing the power for their particular area, and they do that and do that well. What we have here is a bigger problem, as Senator has pointed out, when we get into the gigawatt areas and that kind of things, we have new investments that have to be made. Right now, if we have one of those big users, he can put in his own or her own power installation and sell power to themselves. That is within the regulated organization. And we have that in the Bighorn Basin. There's a group of oil and gas that would like to have their own power. All they have to do is buy it themselves, build it themselves, and they can sell power to themselves. We have that with the other Bitcoin or whoever, the cyber guys. Yes, they could buy their own power plant and do that. That's the kind of restrictions we have right now. Now, during the session, that was not what they wanted. So we said, let's bring it to the interim and see if we can figure out something else that might work for both sides. So that's where we are. That's the explanation, just like Chris did a nice job of. We're looking for some way to satisfy both sides. So that's about where we are. Thank you.
Okay. I will comment is, if you're an industrial user, we may not be as happy with the current system as the residential users are, but that's just to be on the record for that.
And Mr. Chairman, in your circumstance, you're captive because you need to process right next to where you produce. So that's the beauty of a good monopoly, is you can't shop around. You're a captive audience. Entities that are still capable of shopping around that we would want to lure here, or these cryptocurrency mining operations, by and large, they're ending up in Texas because there still is some capacity and they can negotiate. And what you can negotiate, you've got a decoupling in Texas where the line fees are separated from the production fee in a way which means that if I'm just 100 feet from the producer, then I can negotiate the rate down because I don't have to use transmission line really to get it here, or a small amount. With our system, you don't have that. You're using the line and therefore you're using the rate. So we don't provide any incentives for any thoughtful competition, any thoughtful economics. And the idea that you have to, if you want to produce power, you have to own the entire facility precludes any collaboration. I mean, if I wanted to build one, we'll say arbitrarily 500 megawatt reactor and sell power to 10 different entities around it and have an industrial zone, that makes a lot of sense economically, and that's how you would want to develop something like a petrochemical synthesis operation or a large chemical refinery. That's what you would want to do and have each of these business entities be separate risk, separate liability. You can't do that in Wyoming law, so that's another discouragement, but you certainly could go do that in Texas or in Oklahoma or in other places. And the idea that, imagine a circumstance where you were a turbine farm and you decided you wanted to produce hydrogen and you were required to buy the hydrogen facility. You also then can't sell that hydrogen facility, nor can you sell a portion of that hydrogen facility to investors. You have to have it be wholly owned. What an awkward circumstance where we force a captive resource upon a corporation that cannot be sold or transacted because Wyoming statute precludes that system from operating and purchasing power the moment a portion of it is sold off. And again, it works 99% of the time because those situations don't come up often. And what we'll probably hear is it hasn't been a problem. But my suggestion is it hasn't been a problem because we're immediately passed over. We don't have these entities. We don't have large power consumers in the state of Wyoming because our statutes preclude them from being here. You know, we're constantly looking around the country. We're seeing large giga projects that are 10, 20, $30 billion projects being built. For Wyoming, that would be game changing. That would be a $20 billion project is comparable to the gross domestic product of the state, which is around $40 billion. We don't get any of those. And we're certainly not going to get any of those if this remains in place.
Okay, well, why don't we, one, I think Mr. Nelson had signed up to testify online. I don't know if he is online or not. So if he is, be able to let him in. I know we have some representatives from the cooperatives and Pacific Corp. I mean, who's come forward. Anybody wish to speak on this particular issue or?
No, I guess not. Yeah, that's it.
Well, and you know, this being our first meeting, you know, we need to explore these issues and find out what the problems are so we move forward. So appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. I guess I'll take a stab at it. Sean Taylor on behalf of Wyoming's Rural Electric Cooperatives. I guess a couple things that I would say. I agree with Senator Office that it's tough to get large power users here. I would also agree with him that I don't think this might not be the answer. One thing that we did suggest in session is, yeah, interim, but also I think what do we call it? Like a work session with the Public Service Commission and the folks that know the regulated industry very well. What's the word I'm looking for? Technical conference. Thank you. Technical conference. With the utilities, with any large power customer that might be interested in coming to Wyoming and asking. I just don't think we've had enough time collectively to come with a solution. But I will also say that some of this crypto mining is happening already organically. We have one of our co-ops out of Pine Bluffs is at a 10 megawatt right now and is going to ramp up to 50 megawatts, I believe, next week, 50 total. They are having some trouble because right now their wholesale power provider, Tri-State, G&T, they can sell their electricity to the market at a better price than giving a discounted rate to a crypto mining company. And that helps all of their members, including the 8 Tri-State members in Wyoming, by selling the electricity at a premium. We also have up in the Powder River Basin, Precor. I got an email from Mike Easley today. They have one in Campbell County that's at 25. I don't know if that one's up and running yet. They have a couple of NDAs signed in Crook and Johnson County as well, somewhere upwards of about 50 megawatts as well. So they're not at the gigawatt level that, and I know Senator Office is talking about the gigawatts are more like those large hydrogen or whatever type of things. But from the crypto mining, we have some of this already happening organically without any type of regulation or deregulation. And I guess finally, I think a technical conference would be a good first move. I think this is a slippery slope, and if we want to talk about deregulating, everything, that's a whole different conversation that we're happy to have. But I think this is a slippery slope, and I don't want to poke holes in it, Senator Office, but I just don't think this is the answer. But I think we can get the right people with the right brains in the room to try and find out what would be a good alternative, and we'd be happy to help with that.
Go ahead,
Mr. Chairman, we have a big data center west of Cheyenne there, and I'm sure it uses a lot of electricity. How did we power that one up, and how did they decide for Wyoming if our rates weren't right?
I'll defer to Dave Bush with Black Hills Energy to
Oh,
answer that question.
okay.
But I will say it's big and getting bigger. I don't know if you've driven south out of Cheyenne, but Microsoft is building another ginormous data center out there. And I don't know how much power they use or, how they made it work, but I'm sure Dave can shine some light.
I thought you knew everything.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. But I'll
I just
let you.
wanted to give him a chance.
Go ahead and answer that question.
Mr. Chairman, David Bush with Black Hills Energy. Unfortunately, I can't answer that question. It's proprietary, I guess, is what I've been told several times. I will tell you, yes, it is a lot of electricity that the facility west of town uses, and their expansion. They're building 2 campuses basically out there now. So I think the investment is around $3 billion total in the county. So we have seen some pretty dramatic growth there, and we were able to work with them on the way that we delivered the energy. It's all, which I'm pretty sure this has been testified before by Mark Steggy, our VP here in the state. It's market energy that we, a lot of what we procure for them. So that's where a lot of it comes from. So, and they did pay for the infrastructure that was needed for that as well.
So, Mr. Taylor, a couple, I look at, do you have a question? Yeah, go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, as an alternative to what we're talking about here, about the only realistic alternative I see is total deregulation of the state. And so we're asking you for solutions. And as Senator Ross has said, we don't need those solutions in 5 years. We need them in 5 months. We've got a lot of growth coming to the state, a lot of new industry coming to the state, some real energy frontiers coming in. If we can't do something like this, then I see us moving towards total deregulation. I don't think that's what any of you want. I don't think that's necessarily what any of us want. But that's probably the direction we're going to end up going unless we can come up with an alternative. So do you see something? We're not talking about, as Senator Ross has said, about a 10 meg project or even a 20 meg project. Something much larger in several areas across the state. So either we have to build generation and transmission lines, or we have to deregulate to where we can bring in these small projects, smaller, they're not small, 100 meg, something you can bring in and put together in a pretty short period of time without the regulatory issues that we face today. So do you see other possibilities other than this right now? What, other than total deregulation?
We also would take a stab at that. I will offer this, Mr. Chairman and Senator Cooper. One idea that was kicked around would be, and I don't know if this would be popular with you all or not, but some kind of tax incentive for these things so that the state has some skin in the game and it's not just falling on our members or our customers. I don't even know what that would look like. It was asked to me by somebody. I said, maybe that's not a bad idea, but that's for you all to decide. I'm just saying to get over the cost issue, if a tax incentive would be acceptable. And that's just one. But I will say this also, I do think, like if we were to have a technical conference, people would come up with other alternatives. Collectively, the 3 of us haven't come up with anything yet except for the tax incentive. But I think if we could have a technical conference or a couple of them in fairly short order, we might be able to come back with something. We just haven't really had the time. I mean, as I testified in the Senate, the blockchain task force came up with this idea at one meeting, talked about it at the second meeting, had a bill on the third meeting and passed it. And then we had one meeting in Senate Minerals. This is a big deal. It's going to have a lot of impact on a lot of people. And I think, and I don't want to speak for these guys, but we all want those gigawatt projects coming to Wyoming, particularly if we can provide them power, because that is better for everybody involved. But we just haven't been able to get there yet, and it probably won't happen as fast as you all would like. But I think if we get the right, like I said, if we get the right brains in the room, we might be able to come to you guys with an alternative other than full deregulation, because that opens up a whole nother can of worms. and problems, in my opinion.
Mr. Kaysen, do you have some comments?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, Rick Kaysen, Pacific Corp was named earlier, and I represent Rocky Mountain Power, which is an entity of the Pacific Corp family. I think Senator Cooper brings up a very good point, and that's with regards to the timing in this. And if even we were able to have some type of a solution, and I'm not sure what that solution might be today, it's going to take months and months and months to bring any type of infrastructure in to serve the crypto mining or other large industrial customers. And that's based on experience, I think, of the electric industry and the generation and transmission industries for decades and decades of time. If we were able to go out and find someone who already had all of this electricity sitting, waiting to be sold into the market, that's a solution. But all of the generators of electricity are not going to take the risk, the financial risk, without some kind of a definitive return to be able to produce that electricity, to transport it to Wyoming to try to meet these needs. So again, I think that timing is a very, very important issue. As Mr. Taylor said, I think we all want to see this for the benefit of our state. When we think about the benefit of the state, and we also heard this earlier, is what could be the potential impact on the other customers. If we lose load, if a utility loses load, brand new load or load that it already has, there's going to be a trickle-down effect back to the consumers. Now, that's where the Public Service Commission comes in and plays a very good role to protect those customers of any type of the loss. So there is a lot of analysis that must be completed for all parties if they're going to make these kind of investments. So I think the three of us stand in Pat was saying, yes, want to work with you, want to find that solution. We just left the session less than 2 months ago, and we've been talking about this. The tax incentive is an idea, which we've discussed, as you heard. Would that be a reality? Would that tax incentive be enough to motivate a crypto mining or other industrial customer to look at Wyoming? And so again, I know you're very, very short of time, Mr. Chairman, and try to answer questions you may have. But I think the technical conference may provide all of us an opportunity to really throw some stuff on the wall and see what happens. And that should include the crypto mining people.
Yeah, go ahead,
Mr. Chairman, do any of you know how long it would take for us to deregulate? Is that a 1-year process or a 5-year process or 2-month process, or in order to deregulate the state, to change our entire regulation system?
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Co-Chair, I'm not sure I have the answer to that. It would be a it would be a regulatory process to go through and would involve the Public Service Commission as well. So I think we're looking again at some time. And I think the Public Service Commission would be a player in this technical conference.
I was just getting ready to throw him under the bus.
You have a question, Representative Gray, or? Yeah, okay, yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, John Burbridge, Chief Counsel with the Public Service Commission. First, I'd like to start out and offer that the Public Service Commission would gladly host technical conferences to discuss this issue. With regard to the question as to how long it would take to deregulate, it really is a discussion that is, it's a bigger project than what this particular piece of legislation is suggesting. It probably, from what I've read, and I've read the meeting material, in some instances it even requires potential decoupling of the G&T service provided by the regulated utilities from the regulated rate. And that process is, I think that if you could do that in 5 years, that's pretty optimistic. I would imagine that it would be a fairly expensive endeavor. So it's not something that could happen just overnight. And so I would offer that, and then offer our services to help host, work with the utilities and the cooperatives to hold technical conferences to discuss these issues. The Public Service Commission, certainly, we do not take a position on this bill. We have identified
at least one thing that does concern us with regard to our involvement with the economic analysis. It appears that that economic analysis, that we'd be asked to do that at the time county commissioners would approach the state land board with the idea to set aside one of these parcels. We're struggling with how, in fact, we would perform an economic analysis that would determine the effect on other ratepayers without really knowing what would be going into that parcel, the deregulated power zone, and things such as the size of the load that you would anticipate. It may be that sort of analysis is perhaps a little bit too early in the current draft, but that is, again, something that we could certainly work out in a technical conference setting. So if there are any questions, I would stand for questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, follow up. One of the panel said that they needed something right away. So what I'm hearing is deregulation is not right away. You're saying maybe 5 years, maybe more. So that isn't a real quick solution to our problem, is the way I'm hearing it.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, as I sit here, I can't think of something that happens very quickly in order to accommodate the nature of, and the discussion has been focused on crypto mining, to address that, short of having a large load close or leave the state, which would leave stranded assets. That might be the kind of situation that could accommodate such a large load very quickly, because the infrastructure is already be there. And as it has been mentioned, the system currently, the power that's being generated is spoken for. It's not, so there isn't a bunch of extra capacity to be able to serve large loads. You end up with a situation like a Microsoft situation, which again, I can't discuss that in any great detail, but they've got involved in that cost them to get where they are with the build out and providing the infrastructure in that system. A very complex thing that, at a high level was designed not to affect ratepayers over a period of time. But I can't say too much more about that. So, but that's a totally different situation than we're looking at here.
So, Mr. Chairman, what I'm hearing is if we want some fast action, about the only avenue we have is that tax deference or tax relief or some kind of thing we can do as a state. There aren't too many other options for us right now. Is that right?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, as you know from a previous appearance here, I'm not very good with the tax end of the options that we have here, so maybe there's somebody else at the table here that could answer that question better than I can address it. Go ahead, Senator Robles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One possibility that there is the availability of effectively, say 25, 50 megawatt gas turbines on skids that can be relocated. You can actually lease a 50 megawatt gas turbine. If something like this were in place, and if it were already in place because we passed it, we'll say, and somebody was working pretty quickly, you could literally drag onto a state section of land a few 50 megawatt gas turbines, assuming you could secure them and lease them. At this point, I don't know how many are available, but you can look up what they cost to lease, and then immediately turn around and mine crypto. So again, if this had passed already and we somehow expedited the process, now there's bureaucracy between us and expediting that process, which is intentional with regard to county commission and the Board of Land Commissioners having to have a review process. But the technical barrier afterwards is market dependent at that point, as opposed to build dependent, which is, or securing dependent. The key concept, though, is you can be creative if you have the ability to compete. It's one of the advantages of a competitive marketplace, where you can actually have competition and you can try and think of these ideas without necessarily having to hold a technical conference, but just let players that are out there come up with creative ideas to solve these problems. And if nobody does come up with one, that's understandable. Sometimes you don't succeed, but providing for that opportunity would be available. One question, a couple of questions though that I do have, Mr. Chairman, for the PSCs. The first is, and again, I'll just reiterate, I don't believe that full deregulation is the solution. One of the things that we spent a lot of time during the interim talking about, and again, 3 meetings about this in the interim. This was a 3-meeting topic, and then it came to the legislature. So there was quite a bit of time. First meeting was in May of last year. We've had a year to think of solutions. Nothing is here today. There are no offers except for give us a tax break. And I don't think that's going to do anything. But after those 3 sessions, there was a lot of discussions about the challenges that Texas faces. Texas has an advantage on the industry side, but they do a rubbish job on the residential side. We're the opposite. Great job on the residential side, rubbish job on the industry side. This is trying to thread that needle. But one possibility, which might not be as Herculean of an effort, is, and maybe other states have looked at this, what would it take to deregulate loads over 20 megawatts or over 50 megawatts? So instead of having the details here, we just deregulate circumstances where I'm purchasing power in the arbitrarily 50 megawatt and above zone. And we can even add to that, if we were to put in statute, only new loads or something along those lines, or no new loads negotiated for 5 years, something along those lines. It seems that that deregulation would be rather simple and straightforward because we wouldn't be stranding assets, we wouldn't have to assign ownership. It would be forward-looking, but saying free market on loads over 50 megawatts, but once again, as this legislation says, you'd have to pay freight to get the power local, so we'd have to do a little bit of detail about decoupling transmission from power production. So what are your thoughts on that as the PSC? How challenging would that be? How long would that take? 50 megawatts, did I say gigawatts? Okay, greater than 50 megawatts is a pretty substantial project. And I'm just throwing out a number. Maybe the answer is 100 megawatts, but.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Office, not having the opportunity to think that through with any length, I hesitate to try to answer that question, so I would respectfully defer that for maybe another meeting. I understand that this topic may come up 2 more times, so my apologies, but I don't think I am in a good position to try to address that today.
Mr. Chairman, that's totally understandable, and I'll just ask for if you'd follow up and look into that, and whether it's 50 or 100, statewide deregulation with some sort of parameters on large industrial loads. And let's take a look at that.
Yeah, so, you know, my observation has been when we run up against an uncomfortable or a new subject, you know, we all say, hey, that should be an interim topic, right? And then so we get this long list of interim topics that nobody just wanted to deal with during session. But, you know, I think, you know, what I heard is that, okay, we're 2 months out of session and everybody's catching their second breath here. I have no idea what a technical conference nor would I want to attend one within your industry means. That being said, you know, it takes legislation for a task force. We're not going to do that. But Senator Anderson and I can set up a subcommittee and at least cover the expenses associated with those members of this committee that I'd like to participate on that. And I guess the question is with industry, and I'm sure the PSC members, knowing several of them, would be open to trying to find some time, have a more in-depth discussion. Our next meeting is at the end of June. It's pretty quick, but it'd be a good time to get together, kick around some ideas, then bring something back here at a, you know, more of a 20,000, 30,000 foot level for the committee to understand and digest. Does that seem like a reasonable approach to everyone? I'm seeing nods on over here. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, yes, you know, we've offered that up and are certainly willing to work with the co-ops and any interested parties in that, you know, for that matter, to discuss this issue and try to come up with some solutions if there are any.
Okay. I think that would be good. That would, you go ahead, Mr. Ted.
I was just gonna say, Mr. Chairman, I think we'd need to probably talk to Senator Rothfuss and others that know of the other interested parties that could come to these, whether it's a technical conference or a subcommittee meeting or whatever. We know who we need to bring into that, but.
I think some of those potential users or people that have been courted need to speak up about what their demands are, their potentials, so, or the potential demand needs are, would be useful, okay? Yeah, go ahead, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is it okay if I ask a question?
Yeah, no, you're fine.
Okay. I'd like to ask a question to Mr. Case. I'm just, I appreciate you coming in. I know we haven't agreed on everything over the years, but I do want to ask you about this point that it could lead to trickle-down effects to other users. If the project isn't going to happen without us doing this, how would there be any trickle-down effects? Because the load is being totally provided by whoever's supplying those electrons. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. I'm not understanding that point that there could be trickle down how that affects your load if it's totally being provided by somebody else.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, thank you for the question and try to provide some clarity. And I'm going to try to define this in different segments, if I may. And hopefully this will help. If there's an existing load, and I know there's a difference between new and existing load, if there's an existing load that would perhaps end up or could be in the 654 acres of this zone, there's the potential for that load that would be lost. And then there's also the costs that were associated to bring in the infrastructure to serve that existing load. And so how is those costs recovered? And over the years, that has fallen back on other consumers. If it's brand new load that's going to go into that zone, then there would and served by another, then there would be no lost load to the utility. So hopefully that will help separate the two between existing and new load.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kaysen, have you thought about the potential of how this could potentially save all of our, or at least some of our coal-fired power plants? I mean, it would allow you to sell that asset, which, I mean, and we could continue to keep those going if they're potential users of that electricity. I would think it's a win-win, and we could keep the coal-fired power plants going.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, I'm sorry I do not have an answer for you that specific question. This is something that has been identified in the corporation's integrated resource plan as far as its movement from coal-fired units, which you are very, very familiar with. And so to be specific, I do not have a definitive answer for you on that. I will do some follow-up, though, with people that will work on this on a more frequent basis and more detailed basis to see if I can get you a better answer.
Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, you're talking about your technical conference here. One of the major problems I'm seeing with a lot of the energy frontiers that are wanting to be developed in Wyoming is we're going to have outside sources of revenue. We're going to have to go to private equity on some of it. So that precludes that wholly owned entity from where Senator Rothfuss was referring to, either on major projects or on smaller projects. If we're going to go out and ask a company to bring in 100 or 200 or possibly $1 billion into Wyoming, on an energy development, they've got to be able to ask for investors. The way we're structured today, we can't do that, is my understanding, if they have to build their own power. Part of what they're looking for is, in areas we could go develop stranded gas for one of these gas turbines and develop a product with that stranded gas. We can develop our gas markets in areas that are underserved right now. Underserved communities, different things we can do, but we can't go out and develop those projects because of our regulatory statutes the way they are. So we need a solution in your technical conference, how we can develop these projects with outside revenues without it being wholly owned by the entity development, if I will. As we need alternative sources of electricity outside of what your companies are able to provide today without it being wholly owned by the entity wanting to do the development. It looks to me like where we're at. Is that correct, Senator? So that's one of the solutions we need from you if you feel like your technical conference would be of use to you. I'd say that should be a topic for y'all. If not, then we're going to have to move forward with something like this within the state. I think those are alternatives at this point outside of total deregulation, and I don't think that's somewhere that any of us want to go. So that would be my question to you is to, can you bring those, make that a topic for your technical solution, if you will.
Okay. All right, we'll keep moving on. I see Mr. Nelson, who is pre-registered, is available, so we'll hear from him. Who else wishes to speak on this subject? If I can just get a couple hands. We got Jeremiah, 3. Okay, we'll keep moving along. We still got another topic for today. So, all right, go ahead, Mr. Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Great, thank you. And I apologize for the technical challenges that I've been struggling with. And thank you to the LSO for your diligent help in getting this connected up. I'm appearing today on behalf of the Wyoming Industrial Energy Consumers. For the members of the committee who may not be familiar, WIAC is an association of some 19 different companies throughout the state of Wyoming who have in common the fact that they are large electric consumers. And we gather together for the sake of advocating on behalf of consumers before the Wyoming Public Service Commission and the Wyoming legislature. As some of you may be familiar, for several years now, we have been actively supporting the idea of bringing new ways to improve the landscape for industrial electric consumers in the state. And we strongly believe that competition is a way to do that. One of the things, though, that we also firmly believe in is that we think that whatever approach that is taken legislatively, we think that the state would be better off if it were done on a non-discriminatory basis. That is to say that an approach that could be developed that would work not only for data centers or crypto miners, but also for, of course, legacy Wyoming industries who have for many years provided lots of jobs, tax base, and opportunities in the state of Wyoming. We think that those entities should have the same opportunities to access competitive markets where it makes sense to do so. In that context, though, I would, I suppose, like to just make 2 points about the legislation that is before you, or at least the legacy legislation that came up in the last session. First is to say that from WIAC's perspective, I don't know that the geographic tool is the way to do this. That is to say, the designation of geographic areas that create zones. For what it's worth, I think the solution may actually be something simpler than that. I've had the privilege of working just in the last few months here on 2 different deals, one in Idaho and one in New Mexico, where large customers in both of those instances, one was a data center, one was just a classic industrial manufacturing center, were able to achieve independent sort of optionality for their electric generation resources. And so the solution is out there. I guess I would respectfully disagree with the idea that we're talking about a solution 5 years away, because I mean, I'm going in front of the Idaho Commission right now. There's a case dealing with the approval of a contract to do something very similar to what's been contemplated here. So I don't think that this is a situation where we need to either reinvent or invent a wheel all fresh. I'll also say to you that, you know, I've had the opportunity twice in just the last week. I've been on the phone with energy developers and energy consumers who are both interested in trying to find a way to do a deal in Wyoming. And I've had to tell both of them that there are significant legal challenges to doing that because of the framework in Wyoming. So the people are out there trying to figure this out, and some legislative change would, I think, definitely be helpful. And in particular, the kind of thing that from WIAC's perspective, we think would be the most helpful is if there were a legislative change that would be something pretty simple that would allow a power producer to sell directly to a power consumer all or some portion of their electric needs. And what I like to think of this is, you know, sort of imagine like right now, if you have a home and you decide that you want to put up a solar facility on your rooftop, you have the ability to sort of self-provision that electricity to yourself. And then that can provide all your electricity in a given period of time. And then certainly you can go to the utility to buy whatever you need above and beyond what your solar plant produces. And I think from our perspective, what we're thinking about is a solution, and this is what we've seen in some other states, which basically allows that same model just on a much bigger scale, that now you can have, you know, facilities which are 500 megawatt wind farms who are then doing direct contracts with customers in order to sell their output to fuel that data center or that other industrial process. And then the data center or industrial process would then be eligible to purchase whatever other power it needs from the utility under terms and conditions approved by the PSC. That's essentially the model that we've seen in some other states, and I think an approach that would work well for Wyoming. The key to that, and it really is nothing that's very rocket sciencey about it. The key is in particular, most of the interest in this area is tied to renewable generation, wind and solar generation in particular. And the tricky part about this is the reason why it's tied to that by and large is that there are significant continuing federal tax credits associated with the production of wind and solar. But those tax credits are only eligible if you sell the electricity. So unlike the model that you have before, which somebody was talking about, where you have an industrial customer who decides to build their own generation on their plant, or on their site rather, and take power from that. If we do that, if you have an industrial company, you know, a mining operation, whatever, who builds a solar plant or a wind plant behind the meter, you can't take advantage of the tax credits because those electrons aren't being sold. And so in order to get the tax credits, there has to be a sale transaction. And from our perspective, ideally, there would be a sales transaction that didn't necessarily have to be sleeved through the utility, which just adds a layer of complexity. And so I'm happy to participate in further discussions and processes, but from our perspective, we think a solution that pretty simply allows companies in Wyoming to go to the market to acquire some or all of the power they need without any risk to the utilities, because of course these contracts would be done bilaterally between the customer and the power producer. From that perspective, I think you would find that there are simple solutions to this that can certainly help. And based on the people that I've been talking with and the projects that I've been hearing about, I think there are in fact real opportunities. It just requires a little bit of outside the box thinking in terms of the traditional utility paradigm where they buy power for everybody and then sort of socialize those costs through utility rates. In this instance, we'd be talking about someone buying some of their portion of their power just for themselves from a dedicated project, usually in Wyoming, and making the economics of that work much better. So I appreciate the time, happy to answer any questions and happy to participate in the discussions going forward at this committee.
Okay. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, just briefly, I'll note that that was something that was considered. The Senate File 71 was intended to be less disruptive, but that solution is a good solution to provide the opportunity for a direct negotiation. The one thing that it doesn't cover is a circumstance of competition where right now we have franchise regions, and if franchisee A turns you down, it's not like you can go to franchise B or C and ask for a different deal. And so we've seen circumstances where there is a desire to use the grid, but you effectively get turned down by the monopoly that's in charge of the area. So it was intended to be a little more broad, but I do think that it's a solution for a lot of our problem, was just discussed. And I just want to note that I really appreciate the concept about the tax credit not being available. That's something I did not know, that you don't get the tax credit unless you sell the power. And this solution, Senate File 71 could solve that problem, or it could not. So that's another additional useful point. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you, Mr. Nelson, thank you. We'll go with the gentleman up front who come up earlier, and then we'll go with Ms. Anderson and Jeremiah Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bryce Freeman with the Wyoming Office of Consumer Advocate. I won't take a whole bunch of your time this afternoon because I know you're running long, but I did want to make a couple of points here. My chief interest in this is based on the mission that you gave me almost 20 years ago when you created my office. And that is to make sure that customers have access to safe, affordable, and reliable service, and that rates remain just, reasonable, and equitable as to the various customer classes. And so whatever we do here, I want us to take enough time to make sure that we can do that. I think there are ways to do this, and I certainly understand what the legislature is trying to do, and I certainly commend you, and I certainly applaud you for trying to think outside the box and take every opportunity for economic development that we can find. That is in the best interest of everybody in Wyoming, and I've been a citizen of this state for almost 62 years, so I'm all in favor of it. We need to be careful, however, that we don't visit unintended consequences as a result of whatever we might do. And we've done this in the southeastern corner of the state. It took a lot of work. It took a lot of thought. It was based actually on applications that were brought by the utility in Laramie County, Black Hills Energy, to get Microsoft in there. We did that through a tariff mechanism. And we also have a tariff in place that's designed to attract, we call it the Blockchain Interruptible Service Tariff, BCIS. So it's not strictly cryptocurrency mining tariff, but and that was developed in collaboration with some of the potential crypto mining currency players down there that thought that was that was a workable statute or workable tariff that they could use. So one of the things that's interesting, Senator Roth has referenced the state of Texas earlier. Texas is unique in that it is an interconnection unto itself. It doesn't have interstate transmission interconnections with either the eastern or western interconnection. And so FERC only regulates transmission in the transmission of electricity in interstate commerce. Since Texas doesn't have transmission in interstate interstate commerce, FERC does not regulate transmission in Texas. That is not true in the Western Interconnection. So in this bill, one thing that we might want to think about is the Wyoming Public Service Commission does not actually regulate transmission. That is regulated by FERC. The transmission rates are set by FERC, and those rates are paid by all users of the transmission system. So it gets to be pretty nuanced to figure out how to protect existing customers from new build transmission investments, for example, that suppose we have a large load that comes in and is gone in a few years and the transmission investment has yet to be paid for. That's still going to remain in FERC rate base, and the rates will just be set without that load there. So that would be picked up by the rest of the customers. So it's a lot of those things that we just have to worry about here but I think we can do it. I'm not sure that this is the right bill, but I'm certainly more than willing to help the committee try to figure out what the right solution is. I would, just as a last point, and perhaps disagreeing with Mr. Nelson just a little bit, I'm not a big fan of retail competition, and I think allowing retail competition for some customers and not others is kind of a jigsaw puzzle that we'd have to work through. So if you, for example, allowed large customers the opportunity to exit the system and obtain their own generation, particularly the legacy customers for which the utilities have already invested in generation to serve those customers. If they walk, that generation gets left behind for other customers to pick up who don't have the ability to leave the system. That's what's known as a stranded asset. So another nuance we need to pay attention to, I think.
Go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And that was one of the primary driving factors for why this bill is drafted the way it is, because it doesn't have that problem. I did have a question for you with regard to the FERC rate setting. This was drafted as it is with the PSC making the decision about what use of lines would cost because they would have access to the FERC rates where we cannot direct the FERC to do anything like tell us how much it should cost. Do you have a concern that mechanism wouldn't work? I mean, I see what you're referencing there. We can't ask FERC to do anything. So the idea as drafted was the PSC would be able to provide the required FERC rates to ensure that if there were transmission line usage, that the ratepayers would effectively be appropriately compensated pursuant to that. Do you not see that as a viable mechanism?
Well, I think it would work that way, Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss. The FERC rate is what it is, right, and all users of the transmission system pay the FERC authorized rate to use the transmission system. The problem is the rates are designed on the investment that was incurred and the expected usage of the system, and to the extent that the usage declines, for example, if one of these large loads leaves and there were some transmission built to serve that large load, that investment is still going to be there. The rate's just going to be higher for all the rest of the users that are left.
And Mr. Chairman, follow-up, but that's not for Senate File 71, which is going to assume all new load.
Well, all new load, and this is, Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, this was an area that we examined very closely in the blockchain interruptible service tariff that we developed in the Cheyenne area. What I'm saying is if you have, for these very large loads, if you have to build transmission infrastructure to serve those loads at the very minimum, you'd probably have to build a substation in order to serve these loads. Substations cost anywhere from $25 to $50 million. That would go into FERC rate base, as you say, and all customers would pay that. They share in the cost of all facilities. And what I'm saying is, if then subsequently that load left the system that substation was built to serve, that substation and the investment are still there. It's just everybody else that's left that has to pay for it. So
I'll give that some thought. I'm not sure that it does occur in this, Mr. Chairman, but I appreciate that point. I'll give it some thought.
Right. Well, thank you, Mr. Freeman. Sorry, I recognize you, but the name, you're not in front of us that often, so apologize.
Thank you.
Yeah, Ms. Anderson, please come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Shannon Anderson on behalf of Powder River Basin Resource Council. We also have a project of our organization called the Wyoming Association of Ratepayers, and we regularly intervene in public service commission proceedings, and we follow the utility industry very closely. I would just respectfully say that I don't think this bill is the right starting spot for you. There's a lot of issues with it, both from the utility side and just the state lands perspective, the county commission role. It's a very messy piece of legislation, and I don't think it's going to get you where you need to go. I think a better approach is something similar to what Mr. Nelson was saying. Maybe take the existing special contracts law you all did a few years ago, take a second look at that, maybe work it up to something that can have more competition integrated into it. But I think you're starting from a premise that, again, existing law is broken. And there is existing law that actually, again, allows for these special contracts. Data centers are getting built in the state of Wyoming. We are having some projects come in. So there's a way to do that. And there's a way to do that with protection of existing ratepayers, with our regulated system, and with the important role of the Public Service Commission. So I would just encourage you to think that through. To Representative Gray's question about the coal plants, I would just note, and I know all of you are aware of the Hardin coal plant across the border in Montana. There was a company that came in to do crypto mining at that coal plant. They've just announced they're leaving because it's not green energy, and they've changed their business model. So that's, I think, the risk that you have with some of these companies as well. It's a real boom-bust industry. There's tremendous speculation. And this kind of goes back to the state lands perspective, that unless you have a regulatory framework that recognizes that and protects upfront, we're going to have orphan data centers, just like we do orphan oil and gas wells throughout the state, unfortunately. That's not, that's a situation that actually happened in the state of Washington. There's a company that came in and left, and all of the infrastructure was left on the ground. So again, it's an industry that I think you have to protect for. You have to be mindful of the situation. And with that, the Public Service Commission has one of the most critical roles in all of this. And we would encourage you to keep their role going forward and not deregulate them out because of their important role in the state of Wyoming. So thank you.
Okay, any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. I'm going to keep my comments specific to the role of county commissioners in the bill. First, what we like, and I shared this during the Senate hearing, first, that commissioners are involved in the process and remain informed through the process, and that they have a say in that. Second, it's an optional piece of legislation for counties to pursue. And third, commissioners are excited by the economic development potential that could be a result of this particular legislation. Senate File 71 put the commissioners in the first seat of this whole decision-making process. And I think it's still possible and appropriate to keep commissioners in But I think the more appropriate place is, rather than the commissioners petitioning to the Board of Land Commissioners, the commissioners might use their planning and zoning authority to identify areas within a county, which could be beyond just state land, where it's most appropriate to have these facilities. That would allow for broader public participation and allow the commissioners to go through a more formal process to evaluate particular sites or areas within a county that might be appropriate. And then have the developer, the crypto company, whoever it is, be the one that actually makes that petition to the Board of Land Commissioners or to the Public Service Commission, such that both of them then have additional information. Commissioners, when they evaluated this legislation during session, really felt it was an awkward place for them to be the ones walking in the door without some of these other pieces of information answered, such as what would be the impact to ratepayers and the like, and didn't feel comfortable with that. Mr. Chairman, I think that would be our approach. Allow planning and zoning to be that first step in identifying places within a community. Some counties have planning and zoning, some don't, and that's certainly their decision. But let that be the first step rather than the petition be the first step.
Committee, yeah, okay? Yeah, go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
And just very briefly, I didn't go over in the discussion why it would be on state land. And what it comes down to was a discussion that we had during the interim about the property right aspect of if you designate a zone of private property as a deregulated industrial power zone and give a special status to it, you have increased dramatically the value of that land, and you've changed it a lot more than a typical zoning change is. State land wouldn't have had that liability, and so again, it's not that there's any problem with the concept of it being on private land. It was just that it was a challenge to think through the workability of the politics behind, I want my land to be deregulated, but your land does not get to be deregulated. That was more of a Herculean lift than every other aspect of this bill. And so state land was easy. That was really what it came down to. Not to say it's the right answer, it's the easy answer.
I appreciate the backstory. I personally feel planning and zoning is more appropriate and keep it off of state lands, but those are my personal views. So, okay, we had one more person? Yeah. Oh, come on up. Yeah. You can push on it, Wally. There you go, lean into it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Wally Walski. I'm from Goshen County, and I'm here talking on behalf of Glen Rock Energy. I was in the co-op world for 27 years, and I can tell you that deregulation of electricity is a very complex issue and process. However, at the same time, I will tell you that the deregulation of a power zone for industrial consumers is a very unique concept. The reason I say it's a unique concept is because it could be a useful tool in bringing and recruiting companies into Wyoming. And how that may come into play we'll use an example of an existing coal-powered baseload generation plant that could be decommissioned. However, if it wasn't decommissioned, it may end up getting retrofitted with some carbon capture technologies. And this then could be a good recruiting tool for bringing different companies into Wyoming. Those are my comments, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Paul. Any questions? Okay, appreciate that. Anyone else? You can come? Yep, Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pat Sweeney, House District 58. So I didn't really believe I had a lot to offer, probably don't, on this subject, but I really believe that, yes, there are options. I've heard some pushback I really appreciated Mr. Nelson's comments. And I do believe, as Senator Cooper, Senator Rothfuss have pointed out, I believe there are ways to do this. And I would hope beyond the technical conference, I see there are two possibilities here. Public Service Commission, our regulated utilities still go on and thrive. But the deregulated concept, I think, could work quite well for our large industrial users, whether cryptocurrency lasts and thrive. I hope it does, but I think it can bring independent power producers to the table. I would hope that in your conversations as we're going through to look at this, that possibly House Bill 200 could be looked at. I think there's some circumstances there where it might not always be state sections that work best. And there might be private land out there that works best that an independent power producer might want to look at. The last comment that I've got is there was a piece of legislation that did go through by its failure that takes independent power producers away on the analysis and the valuation away from the Department of Revenue, which currently takes care of all of that and gives it to our county assessors to take that project on. And I personally am not in favor of that, but that ship is currently sailing. So, but possibly if that could be looked at also. And on the lastly, stranded gas issue, we have 3 companies that I'm aware of here in Casper that produce generation units utilizing stranded gas and are currently doing the crypto mining. So with that, so thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Any questions? Okay. All right. Anyone else? All right. We'll close. Oh, go ahead, Representative Bear.
Well, you can go testimony first, and then I just have a comment.
Okay. We'll close public comment. Go ahead, Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I remain silent and probably should weigh in at some point on this issue because of my background in the utility industry. I think we need to proceed with great caution down the deregulation route. There are only 15 states, or about 15, I think, that have deregulated the retail electric utility markets. I think there's a good reason for that. And I don't think any have for the last 20 years or so. All of them have been deregulated for quite a while. Nobody recently has been deregulated. And I think the technical conference is a good first step. The safeguard of current and other ratepayers in this process is really a difficult issue to solve. And so we have to be very careful about how we do that. Because there are unintended consequences that aren't very evident when you first look at the project. I just wanted to give that caution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, well, so we'll go through our recommendations on this, but I think part of that is to try to do, subcommittee and a technical conference is called to work that as sort of the path forward. The idea is to keep this conversation moving forward. We didn't hear this in the House. It was brought to Senate Minerals, and the Senate Minerals wanted this to continue to be discussed, and an important discussion. So we are, so Dr. Morrell, this, we had an hour and a half for your topic, very important topic. So we've got two options. We can either have you come back tomorrow and adjourn on time, or we can just take a break here, make our phone calls, stretch our legs, and come back and go through your presentation. And I will leave that up to you and your organization, what you want to do. So, can't hear. Okay, why don't we do that? Just, one, so we're fresh. There's a lot of discussion around hydrogen. And, we're scheduled just through lunch tomorrow. So why don't we set you for 1 o'clock or after the lunch hour, 1:30? Adjust our agenda. Both Senator Anderson and I are big fans of keeping the committee fresh and listening. And so, if you don't mind, why don't we tackle it that way? Committee, do you guys object to that? Okay. Well, then with that, what we will do is adjourn until we're scheduled for 8:30 tomorrow. So with a modification of the agenda, the agenda, excuse me.